Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Brittany, and I'm starting a series today where I basically just spoil a book. Spoil an entire book for you. From start to finish, chapter by chapter, I'm just gonna be giving you all the juicy details of a plot, and you just have to listen to it. You don't even have to read. I really wanted to make something on my channel that could appeal to anyone, like whether you like to read or you absolutely hate to read. I feel like most anyone will sit down and watch a really long video in the background while they're doing other things and listen to it, but not everyone wants to read. And fortunately for you, I love reading. We'll cover anything from like book talk faves, because I know there's tons of book talk books that I didn't necessarily want to read, but I wanted to be involved, like, in the discussion for it. Unfortunately, I still will be having to read it, but you won't if you watch my video on the book. But we'll cover anything again from book talk faves to maybe even classics one day. But for the most part, it's just going to be anything that I fancy reading for you. So if you're down for that, here's your spoiler warning for all the dirty details we'll be discussing in today's video on the story GILD by Raven Kennedy. This is the first book in the Plated Prisoners series. Or should I say, the book where the girl is literally gold, like made of gold, and she lives in a cage for her basically entire adulthood until she gets let out and decides that maybe her cage wasn't that bad. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Like I said, we're going to be going like chapter by chapter. I have very thorough notes here, so if you see me looking down, it's because I don't want to miss anything, because that would be embarrassing. So this is going to be a long video. Maybe clean or do your makeup, get ready, do something. I wish I was doing something. There are certain things that I won't say out loud in the video for YouTube reasons. Like, YouTube will demonetize my videos if I get too in depth, or they might even like shut off my video if I get too in depth with like the whole smut talk. So if you want the actual dirty details, like the filthy ones, download this on Kindle Unlimited or get your own book. Follow along, I guess. But I'll give you the overview, you know? I mean, this book in particular starts with one of the most graphic and strange intros that I have yet to read. So brace yourselves, because like if this was a video game, it would be rated M for mature. If it was a video, like an actual movie, it would probably be rated like unrated, you know? Listener's discretion is advised. You've been warned. This is, I should say, a creative take on the whole like King Midas story. So it's no surprise that the intro is us watching King Midas having a group relation, if you know what I mean. Basically, our main character, who we don't know much anything about yet, is called down from her perch, and she was asked by her king to watch his group relation that he's going to be having with all of his, wait, let me quote this here. Revolving harem of concubines, also known as royal saddles. Keep the word saddles in mind, because that's basically the word that this book uses for, shall I say, an adult escort. And she's looking through her bars, sipping wine, and watching King Midas have relations with 6 people, 6 of his royal saddles, 5 girls, 1 guy. He really has a thing about 6s because he's the king of the 6th kingdom in Oria. Has like 6 spires on his crown. He always has like 6 buttons. He's got 6 guards, and right now he's doing it with 6 of his royal saddles in plain view for our main girl. She is kind of jealous. She doesn't like to watch this kind of thing, but he asked her to. She can't say no. He is the king. So she's gonna sip her wine and just kind of look around. They are doing this in a little bit of a fun place in the castle. It's the atrium, which is kind of like an indoor garden, like a glass dome, and it's a garden inside. He had a bed brought up. That's where they're doing it. But of course, this isn't a regular garden, because this isn't a regular story. This is, again, a King Midas retelling. And if you didn't know, King Midas in Greek mythology is that king that like got cursed to turn everything into gold. This is a little bit different, but same thread, because everything is gold. He is kind of obsessed with gold. The entire castle, gold. The outside of the castle, gold. The marble floors, gold with deeper veins of gold. The garden, solid gold. Like the fountain that had water once upon a time spurting out of it, solid gold. The leaves and flowers and everything that had once been alive, solid gold. This poor bird that got caught in the crossfire when he was apparently turning everything to gold, solid gold. Dead and solid gold. Even like the mattress that he's on and the sheets that are on the mattress and the clothes that are being worn, they're gilded gold. Like the texture is still the same, but it is apparently pure gold. But she's just watching this happen. We get like a very clear image that King Midas, he likes things a certain way and he's gonna get them a certain way. He's telling all these saddles where to go, what parts of them he wants, and they're all for it, whether it's fake sounds of enthusiasm or real sounds of enthusiasm. We can't really tell. They're really good at their job. They're down to please the man, and he is down to tell them exactly what he wants them to do. So that's lovely. Of course, once he's finished, like once he gets he's like, okay, I'm done. Stop. I'm done with you guys. Go back to the harem wing. Leave. Our main girl is still behind her bars in the atrium. She doesn't know what the harem wing looks like because even though she is a royal saddle, she is the king's favored royal saddle, which I'll get back to like why she's considered the favorite in a moment, but she has been with him like a very long time, for 10 years of her life. She's, I think, 25 in this book. She's kept apart from all the other saddles because of how she's been favored by the king. She isn't allowed to walk outside of her bars without the king, ever. And the king's the only person that's allowed to touch her because, like I said, she has been favored by him. He gilded her gold. She is the only one of his saddles, only person in the entire world that he has gilded gold with his gold touch. Her skin is solid gold, but like still has a skin texture. Her hair, solid gold, still feels like hair. Her iris is gold. The only thing that really isn't gold are like her white teeth, the whites of her eyes, and I guess like her tongue for some reason, which if you ask me, that doesn't really make sense because like, isn't it the only reason that our cheeks and tongue are like the color they are because of our blood? And her blood is solid gold. So, but whatever, this is a fantasy book. And he calls her by her name, which is how we learned that, again, her name is Oren. And he's like, are you getting an eye full of me? And she's like, low key. Like, I might be a little bit jealous right now, but yeah, you're still fine. Because even though he lives a plush life and isn't well muscled because of that, he is still handsome. He's like tall. He's got this like golden reddish hair. He's got brown eyes. He's got a tan, even though it's like the middle of winter all the time in the Sixth Kingdom. He's got wide shoulders, a tapered waist. He's just like not muscled. And she's just into it. This is kind of like the end of the first chapter. And I'm just going to read this part to you just because I think it sums everything up really well. But she basically says, I'm an oddity, a commodity, a rumor. I'm the king's favored, his prized saddle, the one he gold touched and keeps in a cage at the top of his castle, my body bearing the mark of his ownership and favoritism, the gilded pet. I'm the darling of King Midas, ruler of Hybel and the Sixth Kingdom of Oria. People flock to see me just as much as they come to look upon his gleaming castle, worth more than all the riches in the entire realm. I'm the gold-plated prisoner, but what a pretty prison it is. We love that for her. We really don't. As he's walking over to her post-relations, he is just kind of like giving her all of his attention, which is something that she really desperately craves. Barely touches her, and he's like, did you enjoy watching? Which is kind of creepy if you ask me. And she's like, I'd enjoy participating more, because she's like literally not allowed to be touched by anyone except for Midas. So she doesn't get to have friends. She's very lonely in her position. She would rather literally be participating in this sexcapade than just sitting there watching from her cage, which I'll explain the cage in a moment. I'll explain it right now. Basically, she has her room at the very top of the castle, and her room has like a giant bird cage inside of it, made of gold, of course, with like all her rooms and like her bathroom and her closet inside of it. That cage has like secret passageways to other parts of the castle for her, so she never leaves the cage to go to them. So like she has an entrance into the atrium, she has an entrance into like the dining room, another one to the library, things like that. But like these are still just all connected within her one cage up into her room. She just gets like access to those rooms. But he's basically telling her like, you're too precious to pile in with the others. And this is also when we get like the creepy pet name where he calls her my precious. Like it's giving Gollum. It's giving Smeagol. I don't know. It's not my kind of pet name. She does try to kind of like push back. He literally snaps at her and he goes, you are not here to have thoughts. He makes her feel stupid for even asking to be let out of her cage for a moment into the castle that's protected by all of his guards. He kind of makes her feel bad about it. He tells her about the horrors in the city right now, living in squalor, pissing in buckets and humping in the streets to make a coin with their... And yet you complain. he asks her, which like she's whatever. I'm not here to have opinions. I'm telling you the story. I'm not here to have thoughts. She does kind of feel bad after this. She does remember the fact that before she met Midas, she really was living the worst kind of life imaginable. He was her shelter from like the harsh, awful world that she lived in, and she doesn't feel like she has any right to complain or make demands of him. I know. And she apologizes to him. He's like, it's all right. It's totally fine, you know? And you know what? I'm done for the night. I'm not really going to visit you tonight. You should go back up to your room. We're gonna have an early day tomorrow with King Folk, who King Folk, we learn, is the king of the 5th kingdom, so the kingdom that shares border with 6th kingdom. No, there isn't a map. I'm kind of bummed about that personally. I like maps in fantasy books, so you'll just have to go with it. It's in number order. And we learn that King Folk has magic just like King Midas, and his is that he can duplicate anything he touches, but only once. Like, you give him this microphone and he can make another one, but that's the only time he can ever make another one of that. But he can't do it with people, thank God, because Oren does have an idea that if he had been able to do it with people, he would have done it with her a long time ago, because he's really sleazy and gross and, like, weirdly into her. Which makes sense, because I forgot to tell you what Oren looks like. Besides the fact that she's, like, solid gold, she's also gorgeous. Like, she's this beautiful girl with, like, a perfect hourglass figure with, like, lush titties and a lush booty and, like, nice hips. She's, you know, stunning, gorgeous, perfect. Again, King Midas is the only one that gets to touch her, so it makes her even more desirable to creepy people like Folk. I mean, to anyone, really. Oh, in chapter 2, we also get the idea of why she does feel so, in some ways, beholden to King Midas. Basically, you realize that she, as a child, when she was only like 5 years old, was woken up in the middle of the night by like sounds of like clanging swords and stuff. And her parents were waking her up to usher her out the door. They told me to go, to be brave, that they would see me soon. One order, one urge, and one lie. Because she never does see her parents again. So she is ushered away with the other children in her village while she's very, very young, and they're like walking through like a battle basically, but they're trying to get them to safety. And when they get to the place that they were supposed to meet up, their escort is killed and kidnappers and raiders take the children. So when she was a child, she was sold. There's not that much about her backstory in this book, but that is the one thing that we do get. We know that she was sold. We don't know the implications of that yet. We don't know exactly what she had to do, but we do know that King Midas eventually found her and saved her and put her in a cage. Chapter 3 starts and she wakes up like super groggy. I mean, this girl likes to drink wine. She like doesn't have a lot to do, to be fair, but she loves to drink wine, and she is a little bit hungover, but she's got to get ready. She's got to get ready to go down to the dining room and be pleasing to the eye to King Folk. She wakes up to realize that there is her normal guard, Digby. He's important, so just keep him in mind. He's just like a very stoic, silent, like father-like figure, but like he literally does not talk to Oren because that's not allowed. Like the guards that talk to Oren apparently get beheaded, and like their heads get turned to gold by King Midas. I know. So, yeah, I guess it's dangerous to, like, be her friend. But Digby has always been there. He's been there for, like, the longest amount of time. Digby tells her, like, get ready, it's getting late. So she puts on a pretty dress, a pretty gold dress, because, again, every single thing that she sees is gold. Everything. So she puts on her gold dress, and this is when we learn that she has ribbons. They're described as ribbons, but like they're 24 ribbons, 12 on either side of her spine, that are like pretty long. They're taller than she is, so they drag along the ground, and she can move them. So they're basically tentacles, but I think that they're fabric feeling in nature. Like they're silky, and like they're a little bit thicker than like an actual like a satin ribbon, but they look like ribbons, and people don't know that she can move them around. She just kind of normally like ties it around her waist, and she uses them to do her hair, but like she does it when no one's watching. Yeah, apparently they got grown right before Midas found her and saved her, so like they like grew inch by inch on her back, and it was like really painful, and she had like fever for days, and then she just had tentacles on her back, or ribbons on her back. Digby asks her if she's ready. She says, yeah, I'm ready, I'll see you in like 82 seconds. And she goes her secret little passageway to the dining room, and Digby takes like the normal living in the castle kind of way. She goes through the caged portion of the library, down another dark hallway, past the atrium, and then she makes it to another hallway that leads to the breakfast room. She like listens for a little bit. She hears King Midas talking to a servant and plates being served. Of course, there's 6 platters of food, 6 pitchers of drinks, and 6 bouquets of solid gold flowers to match the plates and goblets because, you know, Midas has that number fetish. And we get to see King Fulk, who is a large man. And he's got like one of those like bellies that like hangs over his, I think he wears leggings actually. Yeah, velvet leggings. That's like the 5th Kingdom's fashion, but it hangs over the edge of his waistband. He likes to wear dark purple because that's his kingdom's color. And he has like a bald head. I don't know. I guess he's not currently handsome, but she does admit that like once upon a time, he probably could have been a handsome man. And now he's just a little bit old and plump and yellow teeth. Oof, not the yellow teeth. Oh, from pipe smoking. Already, there are 2 blonde saddles straddling his legs, feeding him like food and stuff. You get to know pretty quickly that there's like basically always saddles around. The royal saddles can be used on other royals, like visiting royals. So these are currently 2 of King Midas's saddles. They're both blonde. They basically look like they could be sisters, and they are Polly and Risa. Risa is like the best saddle. She's the best at what she does. She's like a sex goddess basically. And she's gorgeous, stunning. Everything she does is graceful. She seems to love her job. Polly also seems to love her job. She's probably like second best, but like Risa's the best. Both of the girls, like the saddles, ignore Oren. The saddles hate Oren for the most part. They just like don't like that the king favors her so much. They are very jealous of the way that she's treated, that she doesn't have to like do the things that other saddles have to do, and they just blame her for it because of course it's a very like girl on girl kind of catty hate that happens a lot in this book. Of course, once King Midas does see Oren, he says, "Precious, thanks for joining us for breakfast." She takes a seat on a pillowed stool that's in front of her harp. Yes, of course she plays the harp. You know what I mean? So she starts like plucking at the strings gently. King Fulk says some nasty things about, "I do enjoy looking upon your gold-touched whore." Oren expects him to kind of be like, "Ugh, that's my girl. Don't even talk to her. Talk about her. Don't look at her like in that way." But instead, King Midas is like, "I'm aware." Fulk asks like, "Don't you want to gold touch one of my saddles?" And Midas is like, "No, this is a special thing that's only ever been done for Oren. I'm never doing it again." Like they keep kind of talking about her. And this is when Fulk finally says, "One night, Midas. I'll pay you handsomely for one night with her." And she kind of like slips up on her harping because yeah, that's a startling thing to say. She honestly thought that King Midas would like smite Fulk for even mentioning such a degrading and disgusting thing. But everyone's kind of being a little bit quiet, and Midas is looking like considering, like he has like a considering look on his face, and she has a moment where she's like, "Oh my god, wait, is he considering this? Like, is he actually considering this?" So chapter 4, he's like, "How much do I have to pay you? Name an amount, I'm gonna do it." And she's like ready to throw up, literally. But Midas, of course, gold everything, gold touched, is like, in case you haven't noticed, I don't need to be paid anything. I have more wealth than all of the other 5 kingdoms combined, including yours. I'm the richest person alive. It's true, you know, like what could Fulk give him that he couldn't do himself? I mean, in fact, like Midas actually gives Fulk a lot of gold. Oren kind of always thought that it was just because like he wanted to have like a good relation with like one of the other kingdoms, and so like he created like an allyship between himself and King Fulk. So whenever King Fulk visits, he brings like a whole bunch of like random things, like a vase and like carts of vases that Midas will then gold touch for him, and he can take back to his kingdom and just like make his own kingdom richer. Like I said, King Midas is rich, and Fulk is basically only as rich as he is because King Midas is so generous. But Fulk was like, "Well, okay, if it's not money, then what else do you want?" And so Midas says, "Okay, yeah, you can have one night with her, and you give me your entire army for this attack that I'm going to be launching next week. I want to have them mobilized to catch up to my own armies so that we can attack at Fourth's border, Fourth Kingdom, that is." And of course, Oren's like, "What?" Like, first of all, she just didn't expect to be sold. It, like, for a night even, she just didn't see that coming. No one's allowed to touch her except for Midas. It's been that way for 10 years. So she's shocked. And she is, like, pulling so hard at her strings that, like, she cuts her finger. And, like, that's kind of when we find out, actually, that her blood is gold. Like, gold blood drips down from her, so you can't even see it. It blends in with all the other gold. Fulk kind of like scoffs and brushes it off. He's like, "There's no time for that. Like, I told you my stance on this matter." And he's like, "There is if you send word today." Today. All the kingdoms are actually supposed to live in harmony. There is a covenant even in place. Like, it would go against Oria's covenant to not have war with each other. That's what the covenant's about. Like, they all signed a covenant. They all made a pact that they're like, we're never going to go to war with each other. We're all best friends. We're all going to be peaceful allies. So it would go against that. But he's still kind of like down to get rid of Forth. And he even tells Folk, he's like, I mean, you fought Forth. Like, you fought Forth. Like, remember that? And Folk was like, okay, yeah, but that was only when his, like, nasty rot was getting into my kingdom. Like, he was, like, bleeding into my border. Of course, I was gonna kick him back out. And that's when Midas was like, well, yeah, see? Like, we don't want his nasty rot getting into the rest of the kingdom. So, like, we should just smite him before any of that happens. And, like, we can do that together with our armies together. So, let me just, like, really quickly explain King Rot, who is the leader, the king of Fourth Kingdom. And it sounds exactly like it is. His magic is like rotting things. And he's like disgustingly powerful. He is disgusting and he is powerful. Those are both separate and true. But he's way more powerful than any of the other kings or queens of Oria, and his army is also like legendary. It is the most feared army in all of the kingdoms. Like, not only did he have to be the most powerful dude in all of the kingdoms, he had to have the most powerful army, of course. It's kind of shocking that anyone would try to go up against Forth, let alone create an alliance to join armies to go up against Forth. That would break the covenant of Oria in the first place. You know what I mean? So back to Midas selling Orin. Folk is like 1 month. Midas snaps back. He's like, no. 1 night. It's going to be 1 night. 1 night with her, and you can stand with your ally and we can both be victorious, and then we can split Forth, like the land of Forth, together between us two. Or I can reevaluate us being allies. And of course, Folk was like, I'm a king too. Are you threatening me? That's kind of rude. But Midas is so charming. That, I should say, actually, that is like his number one thing. He's a very charming person. But he's like, no, I'm not threatening you, not at all. But like, we've been allies for like a really long time, for like 7 years. Don't you appreciate our allyship? And you know what? Like, my favorite, that's a reward beyond anything else that I've ever given anyone else. So like, don't you want that? And finally, Folk was like, okay, I'll have 1 night uninterrupted and I can do with her whatever I want. Midas is like, yeah. He's nodding his head, and Folk, acting like he came up with this idea, was like, I want half of Forth. And Midas is like, yeah, of course. That's part of the deal. And you can have 1 night with my favorite. He agrees to start moving his army that night. And that, like, he is no longer leaving. Originally, he was going to be leaving after this breakfast. Now he's going to be staying, like, a week for how long it's going to take his army to meet up with King Midas's army at the border of the Fourth Kingdom so that they can launch an attack on King Rot. And for all this is when Orin finally like breaks and she's like screaming no, which is hugely frowned upon, but the deal is done. Like, Midas literally looks at Orin. I mean, for all this, when she like got up upset and started saying no, she obviously stopped playing her harp. That's how that works, you know, she's not in front of the harp anymore. And he's like, did I say you could stop? Let me just read this for you. I don't know. I just kind of hate this guy. I know I shouldn't have an opinion, but I hate him. He says, now sit pretty on your stool and play your silly music. Leave the men to speak, Orin. She's in shock. This has never happened before. Like, she feels betrayed. And she has, like, the thought that she goes, the man who promised to always keep me safe is giving me to another, and there's nothing I can do about it. Chapter 5. It's actually been almost a full week now, and the final planning is starting to happen in the library, where Midas drags Orin down again to just remind Folk of what they're doing this for, because it's basically happening that night. Like, the armies should be completely met up. They'll start their attack, and by the following day, they should have Forth. So it's the day before. He wants to make sure that he has Folk in his clutches. But as they're talking, they do kind of discuss King Rot and his reputation, and basically how his reputation does precede him. Like, they talk about like the tales of how he rots the land to keep his people in line. Like, he rots his own land, like rotting the earth so that it's like putrid smelling and disgusting, so that his people don't riot against him, I guess. And how he's just like this awful, vile, and cruel person. They say he doesn't act with honor even on a battlefield, that he uses his power to make people fester and decompose. People, like living people, fester and decompose, leaving their bodies in the fields for the flies to hatch maggots in. And I'm quoting now, he's purposely instilled fear to become untouchable, Midas argues, because Folk is basically telling him all this. He's like, guys, like, King Rot's like a bad one. Like, there's all these like scary things that I've heard about him. Like, why are we really doing this? And Midas is like, no. He started these rumors himself. He's done it to instill fear in people so that people don't try anything on him. But like, if people try something on him, they're still gonna win, you know? Like, he's basically going down that line of thought. And then finally, as they're discussing things, Blackroot Mines gets brought up. Oren, this entire time, has been kind of wondering what the hell is in it for Midas. Like, he doesn't really want Fourth's lands. Like, what exactly is the reason that he wants to take over Fourth Kingdom and is doing this entire ordeal just to get it? But when he says Blackroot Mines, both him and King Folk kind of get this, like, lustful look in their eyes, and Oren gets the idea that, like, this entire time it's been because of whatever's in Blackroot Mines. She doesn't know what's in it. She's not really allowed to look at maps or educate herself about other kingdoms. Like, she really only has access to, like, a few of the books that are around her gilded cage in the library, and no one gives her any other ones. So she doesn't know anything about Fourth Kingdom. As they're talking, we do see Polly and Risa's return, these royal saddles. They kind of like hang around King Folk. I think that for the most part, Midas has like lent them out to him while he's there. So they were brought by King Folk to entertain while they did their little library powwow, while Oren watches. Once again, this girl just watches. So Polly is on like drink duty. She's been refilling all their drinks, but Risa was ordered 3 hours ago to dance, and she hasn't stopped since because no one's told her that she can stop. So she's just been dancing, which is fine because Risa's like this gorgeous fluid dancer. Like I said, she's a very graceful, perfect kind of person, and she's just been dancing, doing her thing, and she looks great while she does it. She's very graceful, but her eyes are looking exhausted. So Oren, she decides, like, I should help. She doesn't help by, like, saying anything or even asking the kings for anything because that, again, is super frowned upon. She just kind of, like, makes her way over to Risa with one of the heavy books. Once again, I would like to remind you, every single thing in this castle is gold. So the books and in the library and, like, probably the shelves too, everything has been gilded gold. So even though, like, the pages are like thin enough to like turn and still probably have that like page like quality to them, they're still solid gold. So this is a very heavy book. Like, it's heavier than what a normal book would ever weigh because it's solid gold. And she's holding it and she makes her way over to Risa and she tells her, she's like, listen, girl, if you pretend to faint, I'll back you up. I'll say, yeah, she's totally fainted. Like, that's real. You should let her go back to the harem wing. Risa basically is like, I'm working, leave me alone. She still wants to help. She's like, I'll make a distraction. Don't you worry. We're gonna get you out of this. And Risa, once again, is like, literally leave me alone. And Oren decides that the best kind of distraction that she can possibly do is accidentally toss her book onto Risa, like through the gilded bars of her cage. It hits Risa smack dab in the middle of the face. This heavy gold book just smacked her in the face while she's dancing for 3 hours. Oren, of course, is like sitting there thinking to herself, like, ooh, maybe I should have aimed. Like, maybe that was a little impulsive. Midas and Folk like turn and Oren says, my hand twitched. And Risa's literally sobbing on the floor. Like, her nose is broken. I don't know if it's broken, actually, but it's definitely bleeding. So she's, like, holding her bleeding nose. Midas is like, okay, Risa, you're dismissed. Guards, take her to the harem wing. Make sure she gets treated. When Risa does leave, the king does tell Oren, he's like, well, since you decided to hurt her, now you have to dance. You're the one that has to just keep dancing. This is when Folk walks up to Oren, and he says, like, a particularly nasty thing. And, of course, like, at this point, Oren thinks, like, Midas heard, and this was his final straw. Like, Midas still, she thought at least, respects her. But instead, he's like, who told you to stop dancing? Keep dancing. She keeps dancing, and I haven't mentioned this. This is a very important part of the book. In the fact that I actually just kind of hate it. From the very first chapter, Oren constantly thinks bright side to herself. She goes, bright side? ? And then she'll give you like a really like shitty bright side because she's a bright side kind of girl. Like, she's like always looking at the bright side of things. So she says bright side a lot. It takes me out of the story, but maybe if you're an optimist, you might adore that. She thinks to herself, she's like, bright side, this literally can't get worse. And of course, it does. Enter Queen Melina, Queen of Sixth Kingdom, King Midas's wife. You thought that the Saddles didn't like Oren? Queen Melina hates Oren with every burning fiber of her being. She hates Oren. So, of course, Melina walks into this room, and Midas is like, I wasn't expecting you this morning. And the queen, like, looks around at, like, the saddle at Polly, and she's like, I can see that. She doesn't like saddles. They're normally kept apart from each other, but, like, obviously, Queen Melina was not expected this morning, so there's saddles. She's like looking at the saddles and she goes, really? During strategizing, Tyndall? How uncouth. Which is basically rich lady speak for I hate you and your bitches, but either way, Tyndall? His name's Tyndall? Like, no offense. If your name's Tyndall and you love your name, I love that for you. I'm just saying that this guy's an absolutely atrocious person and his name's Tyndall. I'd go by Midas too. When we're talking about Queen Melina, I want you to imagine her like Queen Elsa. Like it's giving Elsa. She has like the snow white hair, the like pale blue eyes, like the snow white skin. Like she's giving Elsa, but she's not wearing like the pale blue gown. She's wearing like an emerald gown, I think, and sapphire jewelry. This is when we learn that they've been married for nearly 10 years and he hates her because she's never been able to give him an heir, and she hates him because the crown should have passed on to her by birth, but because Melina wasn't born with power, she wasn't able to rule on her own, according to the law of Aurea. So she was forced to either take a husband with power, or she would have had to step aside entirely, letting someone else sit on the throne, which she never would have done. Her family had been in charge of Sixth Kingdom for generations. It's shocking that she wasn't born with magic when all her other family in her history had been. Let's talk quickly about that rule. That is basically why all of the rulers do have their own powers, is because besides the whole like, hey, let's never fight thing, another rule in Aurea is that whoever is ruling has to have magic. And if you don't have magic, you have to marry someone with magic, which is how King Midas, a regular run-of-the-mill man, because he was just basically like a peasant, I guess, but with unimaginable amounts of magic, how he ended up being the king. All I will say is that, like, he proposed, the father was like, yeah, I'm totally down for this marriage. And as soon as they got married, the father, like, Queen Melina's father, just died. And no one talks about how that sounds sus, but it seems sus to me. Like, this guy just died right after the wedding. Like, maybe not right after, but like a week or something like that. I don't know. Seems like there's more happening there. They have like this silent standoff. Midas is like, you heard her, Polly. Your presence is uncouth. Get out. And Melina kind of keeps looking around and then says that his shiny prize is also kind of a pathetic flex, which leads to her asking him to talk to her outside. As soon as Midas and Melina walk out to have whatever talk they're gonna have, Oren realizes that she does not want to be left alone with King Folk. Before Folk can notice that they're alone together, she runs through her little cage to the atrium, which connects directly to the library. And then when she gets to the atrium and she's like, whew, I did that, she notices that actually King Midas and Queen Melina were walking to the atrium to have their talk. We hear Melina literally say, at this point, you're launching an attack on Fourth and you didn't think to tell me? Chapter 7 starts and Oren decides like, okay, I'm gonna get out of this. I know how to get out of this. I'm gonna hide. So she looks at like the pillows and blankets that she has on the floor, and she gets under one of her blankets and she's like, I'm just gonna try not to breathe and hopefully they don't notice me, because if they notice me, Melina's gonna be pissed. And it is kind of funny to think that this girl that was described as having like a curvaceous hourglass figure is literally laying under a blanket on the floor hoping that they won't notice her. Melina continues talking. Oren can obviously still hear, and she goes, if we're going to war, I should be consulted. Hybel is my kingdom, Tyndall. The Colliers have ruled it for generations. Oren is pretty, like, surprised at, like, how direct Queen Melina is talking, because once again, Midas has a bit of a temper. Of course, Midas being absolutely cruel, he looks at Melina and he goes, and yet you're the first child in the Collier family bloodline that inherited no power. Not only did you not develop any power, your family also dried up every last drop of coin in your coffers. This land was bankrupt before I came. You'd still be a ragged princess with a mountain of debts and no prospects if it weren't for me. So don't try to toot that Hybel is yours. You lost it the moment I walked up to your gates. Melina literally tells him, she's like, stop bringing up the past. Like, you're literally talking about breaking a peace treaty. These things are not the same. He's like, I know what I'm doing. And then for whatever reason, she brings up the fact that he never visits her bed anymore. And he just has to throw it in her face that she's barren. And then says, if you're done with your feminine fit, I've got shit to do. I know. She says at this point a cryptic, I know the truth about you. And he's like, be fucking careful or else. And then it's done. They walk out and Oren's like, oh my God, they didn't notice me. And she like literally is desperate to run back to her rooms. She's done with the library. She's done with the atrium. She's had too much for today. So she gets up, she sprints through the library, and she sprints past while Midas is actually coming into the library, but luckily no one sees her, and she feels like she's in the clear once she reaches her chambers. But her chambers are pitch black, which isn't totally typical, but she's not really questioning it. She just kind of starts like searching for a candle of some sort, and she's actually shocked to feel someone, like a person, grab her through her cage, and she like tries to like scratch at them, and they literally bang her head up against the bars when she tries to fight back. She's just like pretty shocked that anyone in general has the nerve to touch her. Like Midas is the only one allowed. But of course at this point we hear the mastermind of this whole shebang, of like the person that just like banged her head up against the bars. It's the queen, as she walks on in with a candle. Which, okay, listen. If it's pitch black, how didn't she notice the candle? Like, are you going to tell me that Queen Melina literally waited in the blackness and then lit the candle once Oren had realized someone had grabbed her? I just don't think that happened. So, but the queen basically is there, and Oren realizes that maybe she hadn't been like as sneaky and subtle as she had assumed she might have been under her blanket. And the queen is obviously embarrassed that she heard that conversation with her and decides it's worth punishing Oren for. And then she actually just like says some hurtful words that are low-key facts, saying that like Midas doesn't really love Oren and she's really just a chained up pet, which Oren refuses to believe. Like I told you, Oren is in love with King Midas, and she does believe that King Midas does love her in his own way, just like as much as a king can love, is what she thinks. But she's like, I'm not an obsession, he loves me, she just doesn't want to admit it. But then Queen Melina does say, you think you have his heart? She asks, her tone a mix of mock pity as she leans down so that we're eye to eye. She's so close that I can feel her breath coming between her colorless lips. Oh dear, you're nothing but a dog he keeps kennelled, a prize that he likes to show off to make himself seem more interesting. But she basically just says, like, remember your place. The next time I catch you spying, I'll cut off your golden ears. And she turns to the guard that had originally been holding her up, and she's like, make sure she heard that. They like punch Oren directly in the stomach, like through the bars. And finally Oren's like, I heard. They leave. And instead of sleeping the night away, up all night thinking about like the time that is slipping away, because in less than 24 hours following day, it's gonna be Judgment Day a la folk, basically. So chapter 8, she wakes up and she's like obviously in pain. She just had her like head smashed up against the bars and like her stomach punched, and she's already just like not doing great, you know what I mean? But she wakes up sore, and of course Digby, her loyal guard, does notice, and she just blames it on the wine. She's like, no, you know me, I just drank. And as she's like walking around her little cage, she noticed that Midas did leave her a dress for the night to come, and it's like this sheer gold dress with like a very clear message that you are just a slave and you're gonna do exactly what I say, and you're gonna bare yourself to the public, basically, because this is like a public party and she has to wear this see-through dress, basically. And then Midas does actually come to visit her while she's thinking all these things, and he tries to have a sweet conversation. He's literally selling her, like, later on that night. He's a gaslight king. I mean, she literally ends up asking him if he is all right because he looked upset. Literally goes, are you all right? And he goes, I need you to behave tonight, Oren. And she goes, behave? And he's like, wear the gown tonight, mind your guards, don't speak unless addressed, and all will be well. You trust me, don't you? And she goes, shouldn't I always trust you? And he goes, of course you should, precious. And then he turns and walks out. She like sits down on her vanity. She's staring at herself in her mirror, and she picks up her lantern that she has and she just like smashes it up against the mirror, and everything shatters. The lantern shatters, her mirror shatters. Like, she's just upset. Digby like kind of rushes over like as much as he can, like on the other side of the bars, and she tries to like start cleaning it up, and he's like, don't clean it up, like literally let the other people clean it up. And she goes, I know what you must think of me, like poor favored girl. And he goes, you don't know what I think about you, you know, like that's not what I'm thinking, kind of thing. And then he leaves and he comes back with a bigger lantern that was obviously like from the library, and he gives it to her through the cage, and she's like, I knew you liked me. Like, this poor girl literally does not have friends. So anyways, chapter 9, this is when it gets juicy, I guess. She like toils around in her cage for a while after Midas leaves, and she's like starts to brush out her hair and braid it into like this cute little updo. There is actually a good quote that I would like to read to you, but she is just trying to like pretend that she's not operating on borrowed time. And she says, you can pretend a lot of things in life. You can pretend so well that you even start to believe your own deceit. We're all actors. We're all on pedestals with a spotlight shining on us, playing whatever part we need in order to make it through the day, in order to help ourselves sleep at night. So she's just like going through the motions. She's just trying not to think about the fact that she's literally being sold to like a disgusting man at the end of the night by the man that she was supposed to trust. As she's like thinking about all this, she literally starts debating on why Queen Melina hates her, and Oren's incredible empathy makes a comeback, and she ends up feeling sorry for the woman that's done nothing but make her life miserable. Like, I do want to like emphasize the fact that, granted, empathy is a good thing to feel, especially because like Queen Melina does not have a good hand either. Like, she was forced to marry a man because she wasn't allowed to carry on her family's legacy without power. She's barren. She just doesn't probably feel very useful in what she's doing, which is why she takes it out on Oren. But at the end of the day, Oren's been given a way worse hand. Like, she literally was sold as a child into like child trafficking, and she's lived her entire life like just doing what terrible people ask her to do. And then Midas picks her up and says like, you can trust me. And then he literally throws her in a cage for 10 years and gilds her gold and makes her his favored. And now she's about to be sold by the man that literally said to trust her. I would not feel any empathy for Queen Melina. Anyways, she finally does put on her sheer dress, and when she puts it on, she feels really naked. So she does like a little like fun thing with her ribbons and like makes them like cross over her chest and like her waist to make it look like a bodice almost, and then has it like dangle so that she's a little bit more covered, like it covers her lady parts. She does have like a kind of moment of just realization that she was like, I haven't been let out of my rooms for months. It's not often that Midas allows me to leave my cage. His possession over me is so intense. When he does, on those rare occasions, it's usually just to have dinner with him because he misses my company, or stand behind him in the throne room to show off to visiting dignitaries. And she's about to be let out of her cage for this awful party that's about to happen, to celebrate the fact that 5th and 6th Kingdom just took down 4th Kingdom, you know? And then Digby takes out a skeleton key once she's ready, and he opens her cage to escort her down while she is left thinking about her last conversation with Midas and if she should really actually trust him. Chapter 10. This is kind of when it gets juicy. Up until now, it's just been a lot of backstory, you know what I mean? It's in chapter 10 that we actually learn that the first time that she walked through the gates of High Bell, she was actually 15. It does say that she was innocent no longer, but not by her own doing, but by the exploits of others. So like I said, they don't kind of get into details about that, not in this book at least. So that's all you get to know. And we get a lovely flashback scene of Midas suddenly telling her he's going to propose marriage to the princess of 6th Kingdom while they'd been traveling. Like I said, Oren and Midas actually met before he was king of 6th. He was just like a regular peasant dude, and he found Oren. He was traveling with her, and as they were traveling, he just suddenly, they're in love, mind you, as in love as they've ever been, at least. And he kind of tells her, he's like, I'm gonna propose to the queen, or to the princess of 6th Kingdom. You see Oren ask like, well, what's gonna happen to me if you do that? And he goes, I'll take you with me. She'll have my hand, but you'll have my heart, my precious. She definitely got like a different rundown of how things were gonna work than obviously how it's currently working 10 years later. After that flashback, they open the door to the festivities of the party, and musicians are playing in the center of the room. There's like 200 people drinking and dancing, and there's saddles everywhere. Debauchery is everywhere. And at the very end of the room, on a raised dais, is her king and his 3 saddles, all topless, with the same kind of like mesh dress as hers is, but theirs is in black, unlike her current like gold shift. And again, they're topless. She is dressed like the saddles tonight for the most part. And it's at this point that Midas does make an announcement as soon as he sees her, and he preaches about the grandiosity of the 6th Kingdom and how none of it could have happened without 5th, and as promised, his gift, Oren, for the night. He's saying this to Folk. And she comes forward to curtsy, all along thinking about how handsome her king is with his beautiful russet eyes. Like, damn girl, you really can't stop being his pet, I guess. But he finally has her rise from her curtsy, has the party continue, tells her she looks absolutely amazing, notices that she's like adjusted her gown to be more conservative, and he just kind of like brushes it off and just tells her to go sit with King Folk. And it's at this point that like her actual trust of Midas starts to like have cracks in the foundation. Chapter 11. I know. So she's forced to feed King Folk. It's basically like charcuterie foods. So like there's like little meats and cheeses and fruits and like bread, and he's like having her like pop it in his mouth. She's sitting, I think, on like the arm of the armchair. And then there's like chocolates and cakes and vinegar dips in that order, apparently. Yeah, I don't know. As she's like popping this in to his mouth, Folk is like, your gold skin makes it yummier. He forces her to let him feed her meat, which like her stomach's turning. Like she has so much anxiety and she's so disgusted by what's gonna happen later in the night that like she's not hungry. She's not down to eat. And she definitely doesn't want to eat from his grubby fingers. So he's like literally shoving it in her mouth, and she's like, her lips are closed, and he finally like just like pushes it in until she eats it. More nasty business commences until he just like forces her from the armrest into his lap. He's like, come here, get closer. Yeah. It's at this point, though, that Oren is, like, kind of saved by Risa. Risa does come up, and she asks Folk if he wants her to dance for him, and Folk is like, yeah, please, continue. And then as she starts to dance in front of him, all, like, lithe and stuff, he turns to Oren and he's like, take notes. This is what a good saddle does. Like, this is what a good saddle should be. He moves Oren while this is all happening to sit on the ground between his legs, which she definitely likes better than his lap, but still not ideal. Him and King Midas, like all the men, basically just start to talk about investment opportunities with the Blackroot mines, and Oren pointedly thinks about how gauche that is as they sit in a solid gold ballroom. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Like, she's literally looking at all the riches around her and, like, the riches that Midas can make, and she's like, what else do you need? Like, what does Blackroot Mines have that, like, could possibly compare, you know? Folk, he ends up bringing back up like her goldness into the conversation, and like he wraps like his hands in her hair, and you know, for all of this she's still thinking that Midas is gonna stop this at some point. Like he's gonna either stop it before he can continue, or like he's just gonna stop him when he gets too crude, something. But like Midas does nothing. So this is finally like really where like there's a crack in the trust that Oren has, or once had, for him. So once he's had enough like discussion and of Risa's dancing, he tells Midas that he's ready to retire with Oren for the night, to which the nasty king, Midas, not Folk, just says, enjoy. And as they walk through the crowd, there is all kinds of like vulgar speak happening about how he should do her and how he's gonna ride her and the opportunity, and like it really starts to freak Oren out. Like all these random people are basically saying it to them as they walk by because they know what a big deal it is. She hasn't ever been lent out before, you know? So she tries to repeat all the kind words that Midas has told her. I say kind sarcastically, about like sitting pretty, behave, trust him. And she decides she's not gonna be doing any of it. Before they reach the golden doors, Oren just like stops in her tracks. Folk and his guards almost don't even notice, but then he turns back around and is like, come pet. Ew. And she's like, no. And she says some like badass things about being the king's favorite and she's not a coin to be spent. And Folk literally backhands her and goes and tattles to Midas all, is this how your saddles speak to royalty? He's like, I should have her head. Folk is saying that about Oren. And Midas is like, all I gave you was her cunt, not her head. And Oren's literally crying, saying like, aren't I worth more than this? Which like, you know, breaks my little heart. He says, you're worth more than all the gold in this castle, but you're still mine to spend how I see fit. And while she's thinking about how he'd promised to keep her safe all those years ago, he's literally apologizing to Folk, all like, apologies, King Folk, you'll have to excuse her innocence. I've always spoiled her. She will not misbehave again. She starts screaming no, and Folk threatens to belt her if she doesn't shut up. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing. Oh my gosh. I was about to say I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable, and which is true, but I watch Bailey Sarian and that's always what she says during her stories, and I wish I could be as cool as Bailey Sarian. Anyways, but yeah, he literally says that he's gonna belt her, like with a belt, if she doesn't shut up, and he starts to like drag her out of the ballroom towards the hallway that leads to the room. But what should happen next as they're crossing the grand staircase? Like he literally has her out of the ballroom, they're going towards the hallway that has like his guest suites, and there's a grand staircase, there's a grand opening, and as they're walking through, the doors, like the doors to the castle, slam open and a guard runs inside, one of Folk's guards, who is supposed to be at fourth with the rest of Folk's army. So Folk asks like where his regular messenger is, and the troop says that he's the only one who made it out, and he literally flew all day and night on something called a timber wing, which like they don't necessarily describe what a timber wing is in this one, so you're just gonna have to use your imagination. It's a timber wing, you know? Of course, Midas comes out of the festivities and sees this going down and tells everyone to come with him to speak somewhere more private and away from eavesdroppers, which is just sus, you know? But the guard is like, maybe we should speak alone. Like, he's saying this to Folk. Folk freaks out and is like, just spit it out. Did you deviate from my army? Like, are you a traitor? Like, should I kill you? Like, basically just, I don't know. He just starts to freak out. And the guard says that their entire army just got obliterated. Like, they're in this room, by the way, at this point. King Midas's guards, King Folk's guards, and then Midas and Folk and Oren. And Oren's guard, Digby, is there as well. But the guard says that their entire army got obliterated as soon as they crossed Forth's border the day before. Which, like, to this, Folk is like, no, I was literally told that we won today. Like, our army teamed up with 6 and like they literally killed it. We're already in talks about like who gets what. Like, this is literally what this whole party's about. Like, you're stupid. King Folk's messenger is like, actually, we totally didn't win. Like, for me, like, this whole scene kind of gave like Anna and Elsa, you know? I think I was just thinking about Frozen a lot, but like, you know that song where Elsa's like, you should just go home, and Anna's like, actually, we're not. What do you mean you're not? I have a feeling you don't know. What do I not know? Arendelle's in deep, 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 deep snow. You know, that one? But like, instead, he's like, what do you mean we didn't win? And he's like, yeah, we really didn't win. And he's like, but what about our army? He's like, your army's really, 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 really dead. And he basically says that like Ravenger, so King Rot, his real name is King Ravenger, and King Ravenger's training camp that they like were supposed to infiltrate through the borders on, it was literally fully stocked with their entire army. And then he starts staring at Midas, like the messenger stares at Midas, and he's like, also, one more thing, I have something else to say. They didn't overtake King Midas's men because Midas's army, they never met ours. 6th Army never went to the 4th's border. Your soldiers were there to face King Ravenger's men alone. And the earlier messages were a deceit. Accusatory eyes cut over to my king. Midas betrayed you. Yeah. So basically, it looks like King Midas tricked Folk. Like, at this point, it looks like King Midas probably tricked Folk into sending his army to 4th, made it look like the 5th Kingdom was the only one that was fighting up against 4th, chapter 13. Folk is disbelieving. He's literally like, you're wrong. I know that you're saying that you're this messenger that was in my army, but we're having a party. You're wrong. Midas finally speaks up and he's like, no, actually, he's saying the truth. I know, at least he can admit when he's been deceiving. Folk turns to Midas and he's all like, you betrayed me. And Midas tells him, let this be your last life lesson, Folk. Midas replies calmly, not the least bit threatened despite the deadly menace hanging in the air. True kings don't give out their armies for cunts. I know. I know. It's at this point that Folk starts to like understand. He's not a stupid man. He's just a gross man. But like, he says, you were never going to go take 4th Kingdom. He says, a flat understanding braced in his tone. Midas laughs. He actually laughs at the other king. Of course not. Everyone knows you don't attack 4th Kingdom. King Ravenger decimates anyone who dares. Like, literally what they'd been talking about the day before, that Midas was like, no, those are just rumors. He's just saying that. Like, oh my god. Gaslight king, I'm just saying. She, from her point of view, she says, horror fills my veins as I realize the extent of what he's done. Midas has been forming a bond with Folk for years, seducing him with riches and filling his coffers, and Folk has lapped it all up greedily, happily. It always made me curious what Midas was getting out of it, but now I know. Midas was never making Folk rich. He was treating 5th Kingdom like his own secondary vault. It's brilliant. It's brutal. And I know without a doubt that there won't be 2 kings who walk back out of this letter room. And then the kings and all their guards attack each other. Like, Oren is quite literally in shock. Like, first of all, she thought she was about to get sold. Like, she was already like freaking out about that. And then she just sees this entire like deceit come down, like that her king that she trusts so much did to another king that maybe she didn't like, but like she's still shocked that he had it in him, kind of thing, and like that he used her as a pawn in all of it. So she's in shock at the violence and like starts thinking of like a silly tavern song for some reason. I guess it's because she's in shock. And then a body just like falls in front of her. And she's like, oh. And suddenly she's being grabbed from behind, and it's Folk, and he has a knife to her throat. Like, he's like resting it up against her throat. In Folk's mind, like, if he is gonna have to die, then he's gonna take the king's favored with him. Like, They're both gonna die. So Midas is like staring, and Oren literally just like closes her eyes. She's ready for death, and suddenly she feels like Folk's body jerk, and like it kind of like nicks her throat, but like it doesn't like, she's fine. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of is like tiny little nick. And she opens her eyes to see her savior, because who was it? It wasn't Midas. Not at all. It was Digby, her loyal guard. He literally had her back even when like it looked like she would die if anyone attacked. Like, I love Digby. Digby is then ordered by Midas to just take her to her rooms while she just like completely succumbs to the shock. And one of like the very few things that she does say in this moment, she's telling Digby, she's like, I need a bright side. I mean, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, it's you're in shock. There's a lot of violence. You are a bright side kind of girl. I hate the term. I really do. He carries her up to her room, like up like 6 flights of stairs or something like that. And he like deposits her and then locks the gate behind him. And then I think he leaves, but she just like sits there in her cage covered in blood. Like not her own blood, but other people's blood for hours. She's just in shock. She's not feeling well. Actually, chapter 14. Of course, her king comes in. He offers his hand and literally all but begs to take care of her. And then he says, let me help you, which are coincidentally the exact words that he actually told her when he got her off of the streets in the first place. And she kind of wonders to herself if that was on purpose. Like she has a little bit of a flashback of him offering his hand and saying like, let me help you. And he was like a knight in shining armor back then. And now, I mean, her trust for him is literally very rocky and shaken. So she's just like, okay. So we do get a flashback of the night he found her and the absolutely like desolate state of her mind. She had no roots, like she had no home, and she was hiding and trying to convince herself to build up the energy to go to another village since she can't stay in one place for too long. Then looters appear. Looters being like, you know, people that pillage a town, and they're killing people and they're throwing all of the women into like carts. They throw her into one, but she's actually just so low that it really doesn't affect her. Like she's already messed up in the head. She's like, yeah, everything sucks. I'm not that surprised that I'm sitting here with all of these people and we're gonna get sold back into slavery. Suddenly there's like a commotion outside of her cart and in comes Midas. So like he saves all of the women. All the women are like screaming, crying. They're literally so relieved. They're going back to their families, and Oren is sitting there thinking like, I have no family to return to. Like I am in the same position whether you open this cart door or left me right here. I'm just still fucked. But Oren, like I said, she doesn't have any family. So when she comes out of the cart, she doesn't like run off to anyone. She just walks off into an alley that's nearby. But eventually all of the like sounds of like battling kind of die down and it calms down, and in comes a figure at the front of the alleyway that offers a helping hand, and she takes it. This figure being Midas, and her like past recollection layers over her present reality, and she has the thought where she says, he earned my trust, my love, my loyalty. I wouldn't be here in this gilded cage if he hadn't. Please, he pleads, surprising me. Midas never pleads, not since he put a crown on his own head. And she takes his hand because she's gonna forgive him. She loves him. Like even with like a rocky trust, like she still is willing to look over it for him. He pulls her up and his smile stops the tremors that have been shaking her body. And he starts to like lead her over to the bathtub that had just been filled by servants. She like lets him bathe her. He like puts her in. He like starts to like massage her hair, wash the blood off of her. He like brushes up against the nick on her throat and he's like, I'm so sorry that you got hurt. He had the nerve to apologize for like the nick on her throat, but not like the emotional trauma of being sold by a man that she thought respected and loved her in his own way. He literally ends up having the nerve to ask to earn back her trust by saying he was never truly going to let Folk have her, and he wasn't trying to get Folk's land, he was trying to take it away from Folk because he found out he'd been a flesh trader. Folk was apparently in like the sex trafficking business in this world. That's the idea that we're getting, and Midas found out about it and he was like, I have to take down Folk because that's messed up. I like to save people from sex trafficking, even though like I guess the royal saddles are like willingly there, but still, you know? So she does like kind of question the morality of literally murdering an entire army that is innocent at the end of the day. Like they didn't have anything to do with Folk's like flesh trading business, and she's like, you had an entire army murdered for what? Midas like throws at her, better a man die with honor on a battlefield than a child be sold to slavery. Wouldn't you agree, Oren? because he knows that she as a child was sold into slavery. So like, it's just so manipulative. Like, she does kind of tell him, she's like, you could have just told me. And he tells her that he was worried that if he told her, that folk would somehow find out that this was the plan all along. Then she kind of like worries about the fact that he killed a king, because of course she's empathetic. She's just like literally sitting there worrying about this man that just like tricked her into all of this. And she's like, you killed a king, like, aren't there going to be repercussions? And he says that he has actually a plan for it. And suddenly all is forgiven. Like, she's forgiven him after this tiny talk that they have together of him like bathing her and everything. She literally tells him, she's like, damn, I was so mad at you. And he tells her, I thought you were faking it. LOL. I thought that you knew better. I thought that you trusted me. I thought that after everything we'd been through, you would know that I would never let anything bad happen to you. So I thought you were faking being mad at me. Like in the middle of the party. All the nasty things he said, and he thought that she was just faking it that entire time. And then she apologized to him for being mad at him and for defying him in front of everyone, because that's embarrassing for a king. I don't even know how he got here, you know what I mean? But he forgives her because he's such a benevolent king and he loves her, of course. And he takes her out of the bathtub. He dries her down with like a plush gold robe, probably. And he dresses her in like a little nightgown. And then he just holds her in bed. And she reminisces about the fact that he really never does this anymore. Like he used to all the time. He used to come to her bed. He used to just hold her. He used to just like stay with her throughout the night. And she kind of says that to him. And he tells her like, well, I don't want to make the queen more jealous than she is. And Oren kind of claps back. And she was like, didn't she buy you your first 3 saddles for your birthday, like your first birthday together? In Oren's mind, we get to see that literally gutted her. Like, she knew that he was supposed to marry Queen Melina. She never ever guessed that he would take like other lovers. He obviously brought her with him, so she thought it was going to be him and her and then the queen that gives him his title. And now it's him and her and then saddles and the queen that hates her. Like, she does kind of in her mind come to terms with the fact though that like she's used to it now. Like, that had once upon a time hurt her so much, but now she's like, yeah, that's just what kings do. What are you gonna do about it? Almost like he could sense where her thoughts had turned. He starts moving against her and saying that she's his, and then starts making love with her. He calls her precious during it, which makes me gag, but like she likes it, I guess. And she has this like very real moment where she thinks to herself, he takes and takes, and I give it all. So like, she does realize, I think, her predicament, which is, it makes it a little bit worse. Like, it would be nice to be oblivious, you know, like the saying goes, like, ignorance is bliss. Like, if she did not realize like what he takes from her and what she gives to him and like how forgiving she is to his manipulations, like, I think it would be a very different story. But when it's over, she is still smiling, even though he leaves her before dawn. And once he leaves, she starts sobbing in her pillow. And she does admit to herself that the reasons that she's crying are reasons that she is not yet ready to face. And chapter 14, and into like the next big part of the story, chapter 15. Flash forward, it's been a few weeks, and Oren's stuff is actually being packed up because, as it turns out, she's going to be meeting up with Midas in the 5th Kingdom. So we get a flashback of what went down the day after Folk's murder, of Midas addressing the crowd and saying that they had been deceived, that King Folk, his ally, had been trying to stop the rot in his land and had sent his army to face King Rot, but one of his own troops deceived them and ran ahead to spoil the secret attack, leaving Folk's army vulnerable and making the crushing of his army inevitable. And that same defector flew down and murdered Folk after. He then proceeds to hold up the now gilded gold head of the defector, the messenger, to show the crowd. And he turns it all basically against King Rot. And he states how he's going to take up the mantle in 5th Kingdom in their time of need. And he's going to be uniting their lands, especially now seeing how literally like Folk's entire army is fallen and like 5th Kingdom is defenseless. So he's like, I'm going to help. I'm a nice guy. I help. We then find out that Midas wanted everyone to believe that Orin had already left with him when he left weeks before, and that not even the queen actually knows that King Midas had taken a decoy Orin with him to Fifth Kingdom. Not a truly gold-touched girl, but like a girl that they painted gold, because he didn't want to risk Orin's safety. Like, he didn't want to go together with Orin because if like he got kidnapped, he didn't want Orin to get hurt on the journey, and like vice versa, you know, like better to keep them separate, I guess. So now it's been a few weeks and it's finally time for her to go down with the other saddles. And as she steps outside, like outside of the castle, for the first time in literally almost 10 years, she does actually feel someone staring at her. And it's Queen Melina from the second floor balcony. And of course, Queen Melina has this like look of absolute hatred on her face. And Orin's like, oh shit, you weren't supposed to see me. Still here. Crazy. She kind of brushes it off, and we have a line at the end of this chapter that's a little bit too close for comfort, for me at least, to a quote from Throne of Glass. I'll read you the line, but it's like Orin trying to find a star in the night sky, because of course they're leaving like at dawn, or before, they're leaving at dusk, sorry. She's trying to find a star in the night sky, but like obviously it's really hard normally in Sixth Kingdom to see anything outside of the snow and blizzard and clouds. But her mother had always told her that stars were just goddesses that weren't born yet, so she was like, it's good luck, I'm gonna look for a star. And the quote is, I let my eyes scan the dark sky above me for one more moment, clouds glowing gray before a hidden moon, but I swear for one fleeting second I see a glimpse of a star winking at me, so I wink back. Now the quote that I'm talking about in Throne of Glass that I feel like is so close, I think it's like at the end of chapter 2 or something, but it's Dorian looking at Selena Sardothian and he goes, at the girl gazing at the star and the stars who gazed back. Whatever. Similar, it's not the same. So chapter 16, we're gonna kind of speed through the journey part because some of it's pretty boring, but there are some important details. So in chapter 16, Orin starts the like low-key perilous journey down the frozen mountain, because Highbell Castle is like at the top of a mountain. At the bottom of the mountain is like Highbell City, but yeah, they're in a mountain. So they're starting that perilous journey down this steep, frosty mountain, and she's in her own carriage while all the other saddles have to share carriages. We're let known that it'll be a slow and long 2-week journey to Fifth Kingdom from Sixth Kingdom, like minimum a week and a half. And as they see the city, Orin decides to like duck and roll out of the carriage for some reason, to beg Digby to let her stretch her legs and ride a horse, which like she also hasn't ridden a horse in like almost 10 years, like since before she came to the castle, but he relents, gives her like a white fluffy horse that's name is Crisp, and Crisp gets brought up and she literally like immediately jumps onto him and also immediately realizes her lack of riding skills that like she's lost over the past 10 years, and it's gonna bite her in the butt. She doesn't have any of the necessary muscles. It's gonna hurt. And she's sitting like, you know, like how you would imagine that someone sits on a horse, but the guards are all like gaping at her sitting astride instead of sideways, like a lady would. And Polly, of course, is like sticking her head out the window, and she makes a cute little remark that it looks like Orin does like to open her legs after all. But ultimately, like, she thinks about like switching to like sitting the ladylike way, but Digby's like, this is actually safer, stay like this. Don't listen to her. So they like clop through the city, and we're finally introduced to another guard that isn't Digby, that doesn't suck. And that guard is Sale. He is like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, adorable, sweet guy with heaps of like respect for women that all the ladies in the city like keep catcalling. They're like, ooh, what a sexy guard. Like he's attractive for a guard. And he's a nice guy. Orin starts making conversation with him. Chapter 17, there's more people gathering around like the main street because they've heard that there's some sort of procession happening that's like a royal procession, and they're all kind of excited about it. I mean, they're just peasants. They just want to see what's going on. And they line the streets just to watch them walk, but eventually her group turns off of the main road, and a guard is like, normally we'd stay on it, but the south road is faster for Fifth Kingdom. And Orin basically basically immediately starts to notice a difference in how everything looks. Like, it starts to look run down and sad, and it literally just keeps getting worse the farther away they travel from like the center of the city, like the main road. And Sale tells her that this area is called the Shanties, and apparently Oren didn't know that most of the city still has like a huge poverty problem. And I mean, she's been up in a freaking castle in a tiny golden cage for 10 years, so she was never really gonna find that out. She does ask Sale how long it's been this way, and he tells Oren that like he himself is actually from an area on the east side that's very similar to this area that they're traveling down right now. So she's like, okay, so it's not just this area. That's kind of wild. And she's like thinking to herself, you know, King Midas has a ton of gold. And she does actually say out loud how Midas has all that gold. And Sale does try to soothe her by saying that he probably uses it for other things. And like, that's not really a good answer, because this man can literally make gold from nothing. Like, there's no good reason why most of your population should still be in poverty. Anyways, they keep kind of like clopping down, and all the guards are on high alert in this like really poor part of town when a child runs too close, and like they like kind of like run across the street, and half of the guards literally like unsheathe their swords. But Oren like sees this little girl, like this tiny little girl that's like super poor, very skinny, like in dirty clothes, and she feels like a kindred spirit. Like, she was that girl, you know what I mean? And so she jumps off of her horse, and all of the guards are literally like begging her not to, and she still just ignores them and goes towards the child. Like, the child is now in a group of like 12 kids, and they're all like poor kids, and she tries to start up a conversation with one of them. They realize that she's the king's golden girl because she has like a hood on, but like they can see under the hood obviously that she's gold. She then reaches into a pouch that she grabbed out of her bag. It's obviously a pouch filled with like gold coins, and all of the little kids like start to jostle her and try to like get at the coins, but she very motherishly says like, none of that. And they all kind of calm down, and she starts to like plop a single gold coin into each one of their hands. As they get their coins, they run off, which she doesn't really think anything of it. She's not offended by it. She understands that these are the streets. She's from the streets. She gets it. You take your money, you go. The only child that ends up being left is the little girl that had crossed the carriage's path. She's like smaller than all of the other ones. And once again, I told you, like, Oren kind of feels like a very kindred spirit with her. She actually pulls out her last 3 remaining gold coins, and she gives them all to the girl, telling her like very specifically, like, use one, hide one, and give one away. Like, spread it forward. She does notice that this is actually a very risky thing. Like, it's a risk to give a child this much gold, but she does also make a note that like, hell, it's a risk to give them any at all, but I have to hope she's savvy enough, smart enough to be safe. That's like a direct quote. So right as she finishes this, Digby is like right behind her, and he's really angry, and he's telling her to get back into the carriage. And this is when Oren realizes that like a crowd has formed around her of ne'er-do-well looking people. They're all like muttering about the king's golden saddle, his favorite saddle, and she's like rushing back to her carriage right as like one of the people in the crowd finally kind of loses her cool and tries to break free to like steal some of her gold hair. Like I said, it's worth its weight in gold. And Digby is there instantaneously, and he shuts the carriage door, and Oren is left sitting inside as they try to make their way through like the crowd of people that are like now trying to like get in. And she's like literally shaking herself for flashing wealth in a poor district. Like, she knows better, she does know better, and she just wasn't thinking in the moment. So she's left considering the fact that it's Midas's fault that the impoverished are so desperate anyways. Like, she doesn't blame the poor people for trying to attack and get gold. Like, she understands that desperation, and she blames Midas for leaving his people that desperate. So chapter 18, as they're getting closer and closer to the outskirts of the city, guards jump off of their horses because there's like this weird smell. Of course, they tell Oren to stay in her carriage, and of course she doesn't listen, and she gets out to see what's happening and see what the smell is. And this is when they discover that some of King Folk's dead men from his army are hanging on High Bell's outer wall, and they've been rotted. So like, granted, they're dead, but like, the decomposition on these bodies is not regular. It's directly from King Rot's magic. Sale actually does say that they've been getting these gifts all week. Ew, you know? He also does mention that Fifth Kingdom has been getting them as well, apparently as a show of King Rot's wrath about having been attacked, because once again, King Rot does not like to be attacked. So Oren wonders why they're getting sent here, if the official story is that Folk acted on his own, and Sale gives a shrug, saying King Rot probably knows that they were allies. Like, King Rot shouldn't know that her king had anything to do with it, but it looks like he does. But the guards actually take down the dead and bury them under the snow to try and honor them, or something. But Digby finishes and sees Oren just standing outside of her carriage, and she literally like prepares herself for a lecture from him, but he just tells her that next time that they stop like this and he tells her to stay in the carriage, she needs to stay in the carriage, which I don't know, man. Doesn't seem like she will. But her and Sale have a moment where Sale tells her that he likes what she did do back in the town, even if it was reckless, and that he's not sure that he would have done the same thing. But she tells him that she believes that he would have. Like, if given the opportunity, given that he had that gold, like, he would have done the same thing. And he blushes. Like, she sees him as a really good guy, and he is a really good guy, so they're just, like, starting to form, like, a bond. After a few more hours of traveling, Digby does call it for the night, and a tent is erected as close to the fire as possible. Of course, this is Oren's. She is the king's favored. She's gonna get the best spot. It is freezing cold, remember. This is like a frozen tundra. And after crawling under her covers, she reminisces on a day filled with poverty and cruelty and rotting men, but decides that the world isn't gonna break her. At least not for now. So chapter 19. A week has passed and Oren is still like dead set on relearning how to ride a horse. Like her thighs, they ache. Her body, it's locking up. It's freezing cold. Like on top of all this, like she's got like thigh rashes and like she's rubbed raw. She's cold, sore, in pain, and stubborn. I can relate to that, actually. And she can really only ride for like a few hours at a time until her body like actually gives out. She's in so much pain, but she like hates being in her carriage. So she's determined. Sale does come up to her while she's on one of her desperate attempts to learn how to ride Crisp. And he offers some like kind words about how it took him a whole month to even stay seated, since like he was kind of scared of the horses because there obviously weren't any horses in the shanties that he grew up in. So like it was a very intimidating thing for him to learn. So it took him a while to just learn how to stay seated, let alone like ride a horse. And every time apparently that he'd fall off of his horse, his sergeant would force him to muck the frozen stalls, which like if you don't know, mucking a stall is like when you take a shovel and take all the horse poop out of a stall. It's really gross, especially because in the freezing tundra, it is frozen poop. And as she's considering that, she also considers that Sale might be like her first friend ever, like in her entire life. This girl is 25 years old. I thought like, I'm not great at making friends, guys. I'm not good at it. This girl hadn't had a friend until she was 25 years old. She's making me look good. Like, I guess more than going outside, the thing that she really craved the most out of everything, out of life, was friendship. No one would actually give her the time of day until Sale. And he's just like a good guy, you know? But they continue onward for a little while, and then Sale does tell her, like, he says that he can sense a big storm coming, and Oren, of course, says, like, she wants to bet on it. This girl's always down to bet and drink. And Digby, of course, overhears this, and he's like, betting with the king's favored is forbidden. And then she's like, apparently having fun with the king's favored is also forbidden. And he's like, yeah, that's true, actually, 100%. But Sale says, like, it's probably for the best that they're not betting on it because she would have lost. So anyways, chapter 20. Guys, we're over halfway through the book. Ultimately, all talk does die down as the night rolls in, and like that brutal storm that Sale did guess at actually does roll in. In fact, it's so bad that Sale doesn't even brag once about being right. And Oren eventually does have to return to her carriage to escape the cold. Like, she's not a good rider anyways. They continue onward, but like super slowly because it starts to hail really heavily. And they see like this group of trees up ahead that they think that can be like some sort of shelter. So they start heading towards that tree line, and suddenly all the carriages like get stuck in the snow because it's like so deep at this point. So everyone has to like get out of their carriages and go by foot to where the trees are, and they start to like pitch all of the tents. Oren does offer at this point, which is kind of funny, to help Sale set hers up, and Digby's like, no, you don't do that. And she's like, well, I guess it's probably good because I don't know the first thing about setting up any tents, so I was just kind of offering. Which, this is another thing I get, you know? Sometimes you just want to offer to be helpful, even if you're no help at all. She does kind of like keep watching all the tents being built, and she does start to feel pretty guilty about the fact that she has her own tent. Like, no one else shares her tent with her because the soldiers all have to share tents, and the saddles also have to share tents. Like, there's like 5 to 6 people to a tent, and she just has one all to herself because she's the king's favorite, of course. Really can't be good for her image with the other saddles. But anyways, on the flip side, she does notice like, well, they might have to share, but they also have body heat. It's cold in my tent all by myself. They all kind of like hand out like the meager, like cold rations that they have, like the beef jerky kind of thing, and like the hard bread or cheese or whatever, and they just go to sleep with like cold food in their bellies. For whatever reason, like the chapter ends with Oren thinking that she should have heeded the storm's warning. We don't know what that means yet, but like I thought I'd tell you because that's just how the chapter ends and it seems pretty dramatic. Yeah, chapter 21. It takes 4 days for this storm to break, 4 days where they can't hunt for fresh food because like there's like no way in hell that any animal is going to be out in the freezing cold rain. Well, cold hail. But finally it does break and they can find fresh meat, which is great because they do find fresh meat. They give Oren like a whole leg of this roasted meat, unspiced, unseasoned, but she's like, this is the best thing I've had in a hot minute because it's actually warm and hot and yummy and juicy and it's delicious. Hunger will do a lot of things to us. Unseasoned meat tasting good. I'm not here to judge. She does get dressed and like takes like some sort of bath like with cold ass water, which weird choice, you know what I mean? Like, anyways, she just wants to be freshened up, and so she sponges herself down and then like pours cold water on her head, and then she breaks down her camp and like she gets outside of her tent to see that like everyone's already pretty much done that. Since Oren did have like the brilliant idea to wash up with cold water in the freezing snow, Digby does tell her that she has to stay inside of her carriage until her hair is dry, which is fair. He doesn't want her to get sick. She is bummed about it, but like she gets inside of her carriage and is so bored. After a few minutes, she just like falls asleep and she wakes up very suddenly and realizes like, oh, my hair's dry, so it's probably been a while. Oh yeah, and her lantern isn't on anymore, but she does notice that her carriage is like stopped. Like it had been moving when she fell asleep. So of course, what does Oren do? She jumps out. This girl has never stayed in a carriage a day in her life, even though Digby begs her to. Finds Sale, and Sale says that Digby saw some kind of like disturbance in the snow up ahead, and he had scouts go check it out. Sale then says that she probably should get back into her carriage, but Oren, I guess this is actually the moment like that Oren like truly realizes like I can't be in a carriage, I can't be caged anymore, like I don't know how anyone's ever gonna get me back in a cage again. I'm gonna have to have a serious talk with Midas about never letting me be caged again when I finally do see him. So she's like, no, I'm not going back in that carriage, let's go find Digby, and she like runs ahead without Sale. So Sale obviously does follow her as she goes to meet up with the other guards up ahead, and as she passes the carriage filled with all the saddles, she's surprised to see like Risa hanging out of the window, like even more shocked because Risa actually does call her name out. Like she's like, Oren, and Oren's like, me? But Risa literally just is like, what's going on? And she's like, I don't know, I'm about to find out. And Risa's like, okay, well, tell us if you find out. But honestly, this is progress. Like this is progress for her whole like friend circle. Like I said, her and Sale gotten pretty close over this entire journey, but that's her only friend. Sale at this point, like once they're like walking past Risa, he brings up the book incident, like her smacking Risa in the face with a book, and she's like, I was helping her. And Sale actually says like, you know what? If that's you helping someone, you can just never help me out. But it does turn into a sweet moment because he says that he hadn't been sure if he actually wanted to take this job of accompanying her and the other saddles to Fifth Kingdom. And he kind of like expands on the fact that some people thought that Oren had just been being a bitch when she like threw the book at Risa, but that some of the other guards had actually kind of like deduced the fact that Risa had been exhausted after 3 hours of dancing and she wanted to help Risa. And like she did it in a weird way, but like she was still trying to help. But they do finally crest the hill where all the other scouts and Digby are watching to see if the scouts are coming back, and Digby obviously does question why she's out of her carriage once again. He does let it go though fairly easily. She's like, I just wanted to know what was going on. And he tells her that the scouts saw movement up ahead, which may or may not have been an avalanche. Like they just saw moving snow. But like side note, if it was an avalanche, wouldn't it have already reached you? Like, if it's been, like, minutes upon minutes upon minutes of waiting for these scouts to get back because they thought they saw an avalanche, like, if it was gonna affect you, wouldn't it have already? I don't think avalanches last that long. I don't live in a snowy area, though, so let me know. But she does finally ask, like, how much longer it should be until the scouts do return, and he ominously says, that's the thing. They should have been back already. Dun 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 dun! Next chapter. So chapter 23, after they all like wait for a few extra minutes, Digby gets a few of the other guards and says that he and them are going to go and scout what's going on. And he tells Sale to watch over Oren and to wait near the carriages in case they have to run from this like potential avalanche, which like I said, if you asked me, it would have already happened. Like if this was going to be an issue, I think an avalanche, they move really fast. So I don't think that you being like 100 yards away would have saved you, you know? But what do I know? I'm just a silly girl talking to a camera. But it is really dark, and they literally leave with like one lantern, like Digby and the other guards. I don't know. When I was picturing the scene, it was definitely giving like season 8 of Game of Thrones. That one episode with the lights in the night, you know? I think you know which one I'm talking about if you've seen Game of Thrones. Even if you haven't, probably. But especially because as Oren goes back to the carriage, she can literally only see the light getting smaller in the snowy fields. And she has this odd premonition about him leaving because he's basically been her steady rock since that one night with that folk held a knife to her throat. Like, she has this idea that, like, Digby knew that she needed his support, that she had been through some sort of trauma, and that he was, like, her only stable person. And so he'd actually picked up like extra shifts and worked longer hours, and like he'd been right outside of her cage right after the event for this entire time up until now. And this is like the first time that he's really leaving her since then, and she feels really weird about it. But Sale does try to comfort her by saying that he's gonna come back. He's like, he is an amazing soldier, like he's a really good soldier. And she literally tells him, she's like, but like against an avalanche? Fair question, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter how good of a soldier you are, in my opinion. If an avalanche is gonna get you, it's gonna get you. Sale does respond with, a little thing like an avalanche wouldn't be enough to stop him. He's too stubborn. I get that. This is kind of when Oren's like, well, if he's such a good soldier, then why has he always been on like babysitting duty, like with me? Sale actually informs Oren that he heard that Digby requested it, like that Digby wanted that position for some unknown reason, that he could have had any position that he wanted, because once again, he is a really good soldier, but for some reason, he wanted to be Oren's guard, and he's been her best guard, her only guard that's like really stayed the entire time. She kind of feels a little bit special about that. But she finally does get back to where her carriage is, and she hears this like thunder strike, and she thinks to herself, she's like, oh gosh, not another storm, like it just broke. And Sale is actually looking out to where Digby and the other guards disappeared to, and he cryptically tells her, that's no storm. And at this point, one of the saddles inside of the other carriage points into the distance, and she's like, what's that? And there's like this giant fire where like Digby and the other scouts had been in, and Oren is like, well, maybe that's like the lantern, which makes no sense because a lantern would not look like that from far away, you know what I mean? Sale is like the voice of reason, and he's like, that's not what a lantern would look like right now. And then they see this one giant fire spread apart into like 10 or 12 slightly smaller fires that are like racing towards them in a line. Like they spread into a line, again, giving season 8 of Game of Thrones, and just like racing towards them. And somehow this kind of looks like an avalanche to Oren because like there's like something white moving, but someone finally says snow pirates. Now, a little bit of info dumping happens in the book. Let me just tell you what they say about the snow pirates. They roam here in the Barrens, and they stalk the breakwater port, pillaging imports, stalking trade routes, stealing whatever they can. They call themselves the Red Raids, their faces always covered in blood-red balaclavas. I've heard Midas grumble about stolen shipments, no doubt they're doing, but no one ever spoke about the danger of the snow pirates tracking us. They go for the ships and the large hauls, not traveling caravans, even though their caravans are all solid gold, I should mention. So everyone does panic and gets inside of their carriage, Oren included, finally. Sale locks the door behind Oren, and it's at this point that he's like, where the hell did your driver go? Which, like, where did he go? You know what I mean? Like, did he just take a horse and run? Who knows? But Sale has to get into the driver's seat of the carriage so that, like, her carriage can be driven. So, like, protect the king's favorite, and all of the guards, like, kind of coalesce around her carriage, the ones that are on horses at least. They converge around her, and as they're racing away from this line of snow pirates, her lantern actually breaks against the outside of her carriage, so the scene is like plunged into darkness, which I'm pretty sure they said earlier in the book that her lantern wasn't on, so like when did it get turned on and why did it just break, you know? But all we hear is like this whipping wind and battle cries and hooves, and she has like this cute little thought that it's almost like the pirates were waiting for them. She's like, that's kind of weird, they're really far away from where they normally are, maybe they were waiting for us. And as she like trembles in fear, we get an especially touching moment of her back ribbons unraveling from around her waist and squeezing her hands in solidarity and comfort. I don't know, it's kind of like they have a mind of their own, but like she can control them when she wants, I guess. But her wheel ends up hitting something, and like she like jerks up, and the only thing that stops her from slamming into the ceiling is her ribbons, because they like brace against the four walls of the carriage, which is interesting. Like they haven't really acted like that before. Sale yells something, and they take like a sharp left turn, and I quote, "And the wheels go up while the ground stays down." Makes sense. And then the carriage just starts rolling, and this time her ribbons like can't brace her, like it's just too much. So I want to read you this line because it was horrifying to me. Yeah, right here. So she goes, like a rag doll I'm flung, blows landing to every part of my body. For a moment, I worry that flipping will never stop, that I'll be trapped in the fall, forever spinning in the dark, no hope of an end. And like, I don't know if I was just in a moment when I was reading that, but I was like, oh my God, can you imagine? Like if you were in a carriage, everything is dark, you're suddenly like yanked and you're rolling, you're hitting all four sides, and like it's going on for so long that you just sit there and you're like, oh my God, what if this is my eternity? Because like, what if I just died and like this is just how death is? That's, oh, I don't know. That really spooked me. Glass flies, wood splinters, gilded edges snap. I feel an explosion of pain, a flare of that red fire burning behind dimming eyes, and then I black out. Because her head smacks against the carriage wall as it like finishes its rolling, I guess. So chapter 24, she slowly comes to and she's like feeling these rays of sunlight on her face and like soft touches to her face. But when she opens her eyes, it's actually just her ribbons brushing against her face. Like I said, they kind of have a mind of their own sometimes. And the sunlight was apparently like totally in her head. There's no sunlight anywhere. It's still dark. But the carriage is on its side, broken, but it's also apparently like intact enough around her. I guess that's the good thing about having a solid gold carriage. It doesn't really break that much. But snow has started to fill the carriage and it's like numbing her legs. The door is above her, so it's like on its side. The door's right above her, and she like stands up to get herself out of it, even as she hears like all of these like crashing swords and like shrieking women. But as she peeks out, like she like peeks her head out of the carriage, this like giant man is like stomping on top of her carriage, and he sees her peeking out and he like grabs her by the arms and just pulls her out, and she's like fighting it, but like she like hits her head again right where she hit it originally, so that's not really good for her. He just gets her up, and as he gets her up, he just throws her over the side of the carriage, and she's like standing for a second, but then she falls. And this girl has the worst luck, I swear, because as she falls over, she like goes face and shoulder first into this giant rock that's being hidden by the snow, so like it like messes up her whole face. Like you just got hit in the back of the head and now your face is messed up too. Like her mouth fills with blood and like, yeah, I don't know. So the man then jumps down from on top of her carriage and he grabs her and he turns her to face him to like look at him, and she still has her cloak on, I guess. She does notice that he's wearing white furs to blend in, and there's a red cloth around his face. So he's like for sure part of the red raids. And of course at this point we hear Sail like out of nowhere tell the man that's holding Oren to get the fuck away from her. It cuts to him, like Sail, being hauled by like 3 snow pirates. And his golden armor and his cape are all like stripped off of him. He's left in his undergarments in the freezing cold, and he's been beaten up. Like his face is super beat up. So I guess she was knocked out for a while. All the pirates just kind of like laugh at him for telling the dude to stop touching Oren. And the dude that's holding Oren throws back her hood. He's like, she's got paint all over her, but she's like hot, because I guess he thinks that her gold skin is paint. And he goes, Captain Fane will want to see her. They're like, we'll kill him if you don't come with us, so shut up and be good. So she does go with him. Of course, Sail is like her only friend. She's feeling really guilty at this point, and she's like marched over to where presumably the snow pirate ships await. And while she's like getting hauled along, she can't help but think of Sail's life. This is kind of like an info dumpy part as well. We didn't really hear about Sail's life before this, but I guess this entire time that they've been traveling together, Sail has been telling her about his life and like his family and his siblings, and you start to realize that not only are they like friends, but like that's her best friend. And she starts to feel so bad because she knows he's mostly in this position because of her, and that he doesn't deserve it because he's a really good person. And he literally just keeps like apologizing to her. He's like, I'm so sorry you got caught. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. And she's like, no, this is my fault. Moving forward to chapter 25, they march up this hill and they see these 3 giant pirate ships, like snow pirate ships, pulled up onto the snowdrift. And now we're led to believe that these basically look like massive snow sleds, like really giant snow sleds, no sails, and they're just being pulled by these beasts called fire claws. So I'm imagining like Santa's sleigh, but in white, really big, like pirate ship sized, and then these things that I'm about to describe to you, fire claws. Like you have to hear what these look like, because Honestly, it's pretty ridiculous. Imagine saber-toothed tigers. You know saber-toothed tigers, like the Ice Age saber-toothed tigers with the giant saber teeth. But instead of having like giant fangs that end in sharp points, these guys' fangs end in giant shovels that they can use to like dig and like push at the snow. And they're 10 feet tall. Like 10 feet tall. Their feet are also on fire. Yeah. They don't really like have to have their feet on fire all the time. Like some of them literally have all 4 feet on fire right now. Some of them only have 1. Some of them have like, I don't know. That's the balls of flame though that she had seen like hauling ass towards them in the last chapters. It was just the fire feet of the fire claws. We finally also find out that that thunder noise that they thought that they heard was actually the fire claws, as like a snow pirate actually whips all of the fire claws in one line, and when they growl, their growls all like combine into the sound of thunder. So yeah, these beasts are beastie. Oren at this point is like, I thought they were a myth. And then the pirate goes, more like a nightmare. I mean, he doesn't do the mwahaha, I added that. They like haul her closer. Let me set the scene. She's seeing pieces of these gold carriages that all of them had been riding in being hauled into the ships with surviving horses as well. She sees Crisp among the surviving horses being led into the snow pirates' ships. She hears saddles screaming as they're being led to the front of the ships, and all you can see are these dead guards' bodies littering the ground, some still alive, like farther away from the ships, being like just left in the snow, bound and gagged in their undergarments, which they're going to be hypothermic pretty soon. And she finally gets led to where all the other saddles are lined up, which they're like lined up right in front of the fire claws. And you would assume that that would make them warm. But Oren has a moment where she's like, I can't even feel the heat. I'm in so much shock, which fair. They just don't know what's going to happen next. Sail gets led away from her to where the other surviving guards are being held, and she kind of breaks as he's being led away from her, and she starts just screaming his name. She's like, Sail, Sail, Sail. Like, she doesn't want to be parted from him at all, and she's just freaking out. And then she notices that the saddle that's standing next to her is actually Polly, and Polly is sobbing, and she, I guess, like, her clothing got torn somehow, and like what happened with, I mean, I don't know, it got torn at some point, and she's like barely clothed. And Oren feels bad, so she actually gives her the coat that she's wearing. At the start of this trip, I should have mentioned, she got like this really fancy like fur coat given to her. It's very high end, but she gives it to Polly because of course Oren has a heart of gold. She's not just made of gold, she has a heart of gold. And she takes it off and she starts like putting Polly into it, and Polly instantly, for whatever reason, goes like on defense as she's trying to get her into this jacket, and she's like, stop it, what are you doing? But then after she like buttons her all the way in, Polly like calms down and realizes like she was just trying to help. And she like begrudgingly tells her thank you. It's at this point that Polly kind of like starts like just saying what's on her mind, and she's like, we're going to be used up and sold by these snow pirates. Like you don't understand how bad it's about to get. Like they are going to use us until we are just like nothing is left of us, and then they're going to sell us off. They all continue to watch the scene, shivering. The guards in the distance are like literally hypothermic. Some of them just start dropping dead. Through it all though, she keeps staring into Sail's eyes. Like his blue eyes are bound to her gold eyes, and he's like smiling at her, and like she can feel that like mentally he's trying to tell her like, you're all right, everything's gonna be all right, until the captain comes down the gangplank from the ship, and he's dressed the same as all the other snow pirates, but he also has the added addition of having a rust, like dried blood, basically, red hat on his head with a black feather. Chapter 26 begins. Okay, basically, Captain comes down, he's like, how'd we do? And one of his men is like, this is the best haul we've ever had, which is kind of funny, because when you think about it, like, all the ships and everything that they've stolen from still somehow don't add up to the material wealth of what these saddles were being escorted with. And this man that told his captain is named Quarter. Yeah. His men are all like, yay, we gotta go to Hall. And he's looking at these, and he's like, these horses are kind of dressed too nice to just be regular horses. I think we've got the king's royal saddles amongst us. And all of his men just start cheering because, like, of course, that's like hella bragging rights. Like, these are girls that are only meant for the king, and they're about to do unmentionable things, you know? For some reason, as Fane's like walking down the line of royal saddles, he like stares right at Polly as she's like wearing the fur coat. and he has her held back as he rips the coat open, like making all the buttons fly off of her, and like looks at her body beneath like the broken pieces of dress, which I mean, like, why? Like, it could have been anyone. And he tells her, he's like, you're gonna look me in the eye, and she's like, she has her eyes closed and she's like screaming, and he's like, whoever it is that's holding Polly back, he's like, if Captain Fane wants her to look him in the eyes, she has to open her eyes. And then she just faints, like, and they let her drop. They just drop her. They're like, oh, she fainted. They say like a really gross thing that they're gonna have to train the weakness out of these saddles. Oren, like, for all of this, like, besides looking into Sail's eyes, she kind of keeps like also looking at this like mountain pass that's like straight ahead that they were supposed to go through to get to Fifth Kingdom. And she's like, we were so close. Midas, please save me. This is somehow all my fault. Of course, this is when Fane stops right in front of her and he calls for like a light, and he literally almost burns her face by like holding the torch as close to her face as possible. Sees like that she's, you know, covered in gold with gold skin, gold hair. Like, I think it was pretty obvious with or without that light, like burning her cheek basically. Then she sees like his eyes like light up with triumph, and he just keeps inspecting her, and he takes like his red face cloth off to look at her better, I guess. And we get like this very helpful moment of her saying he's probably only 30, like he's a lot younger than a captain of the Red Raids should be. That's great, Oren. I'm so glad that this is what you're focusing on. But then he like grabs her hand and he licks it, and he tries to like rub it away, like to see if she's painted gold, I guess. After all this, he finally shouts to the whole like posse around them the lovely line of, look, we have Midas's gilded whore. Lovely. Chapter 27. She's like basically saying like, please just like sell me to Midas. Like, he'll give you anything. Like, he is the richest man in the entire world. He can give you anything. And he's like, there's no way we'll be selling her to Midas, because I'm gonna somehow get a way better price somewhere else, which actually literally doesn't make sense. Like, Midas can make gold. There's no one that can actually pay you more for his gilded girl than him. He's like basically saying like, yeah, in the meantime, while we wait for like a message to come back, because they're gonna send out hawks to like all of his favorite selling people, saying that they have the royal saddles. They're not going to say that Oren's amongst them, because that would cause like a whole other issue, but they're going to say that they have all the royal saddles, and then when these people visit, they'll be like, look at the gilded girl, how much do you want for her? But in the meantime, while they wait for these replies, they're gonna use all of the saddles as they'd like, and they'll also have to earn their keep by like doing chores around the ships. It's just getting worse and worse. Like, these pirates are not good people. They're really bad. He literally tells Oren, he's like, I'll be breaking you in myself. I want to keep her in my cabin. And this is the point where Sail from far away like speaks up with a very clever, get your hands off of her. So Fane walks over to Sail at this point, and he asks him his name, and Sail obviously is like, Sail. And then Fane tells all of his pirates, he's like, Reds, did you hear that? We finally got a sail for our sailless ship. Yeah. So Sail says what everyone's been thinking, that Midas will pay anything to have her back, and Fane says, time to ensure that there's something that he can't buy. In fact, maybe I'll even just keep her for myself to make sure of it. So I guess like we finally got a reason for why he's not going to sell her back to Midas. He just has like some weird vendetta against him. And he says like some really nasty things about what he's going to do to Oren and what hair from her he'll send to Midas. He's like, I'm going to send her pretty little hair, maybe even her pretty little hair in a pretty little box to Midas, and taunt him with what I'm doing to his favored. As he's saying all of this, he keeps dropping piles of snow onto Sail, who's like literally already hypothermic. I'm gonna read what he was saying. It was gross. All right, I'm gonna bleep out the words that are not appropriate, so just use your imagination. She's going to be nothing but a gold filled husk by the time I'm done with her. I told you, everyone's like really obsessed with their like semen in this book. I don't know why. He says, but you won't care because you'll be dead. And at this point, Sail locks his eyes once again with Oren's, and his blue eyes are locked to hers, and he nods, and it's going to be okay. But like, of course it's not, because Fane at this point takes a wicked knife out of like a scabbard that he has attached to him, and he just shoves it into Sail's chest. Which is apparently like the last straw for Oren. She starts like screaming and runs over to him, and she holds him in his last breaths in a really touching scene. All I'm able to do is twist him up to keep his face pointed at the sky. Mouth dribbles red life. My heart shatters itself against my ribs. He looks at me, my teardrops landing on his. I sob. He shudders. It's okay, I cry, lying for him as he did for me. And with his last breath, he nods. So Rain's dead. Sail's dead. And chapter 28 starts with like all the pirates hauling her and all the other saddles up to the ship, and a new storm starts. So I guess a new storm was gonna start. She literally just can't hear anything. Like, she's in shock right now over her own sorrow and her self-blame. She feels like if Sail hadn't had to stand up for her, that he would have lived, and like she doesn't deserve his death. And she also has like this insane guilt about him being like her first and only friend, and he just died because of her. And at this point, like Quarter, if you'll remember Quarter, I guess he's like Captain Fane's first man. He throws her onto the ship with the other saddles, where in a huge moment for Oren's friend roster, Risa actually holds out her hand to help her up. Like, she'd fallen down, so Risa's like, come on, take it. Because Oren was just staring at her hand. She's like, what do I do with that? This poor girl, she's never had a friend. Leave her alone. Then, as soon as she helps her up, like a black-haired saddle that we learn is named Mist elbows past her like really, really meanly, and like the war moment is over. And for some reason, this causes Oren to like snap again, and her 24 back tentacles react to her rage, and she like shoves Mist like with all her might, and Mist goes flying. She like literally barrels into other saddles that fall over, and she like barrels into pirates that fall over until she like finally like stops. Somehow she's fine, I guess. Mist stands up, she's ready to fight, and Risa's like, come on, we can't be fighting amongst ourselves. Like, come on, this is exactly what they want. And Mist takes the time to blame Oren for being the king's favored. She's like, this is all your fault. You're the king's favored. It's funny because this is literally what Oren's already thinking, but like, it doesn't actually make sense. But it's at this point that Mist brings up the fact. She's like, you heard the guards. You heard them say, protect the king's favored. It doesn't matter who the guards had been protecting. Let's be honest. You all would have been ended up in the exact same position. They're all just like, this is Oren's fault. Yeah, you're right, miss. This is Oren's fault for being the king's favored. It's at this point that Oren starts like looking for Sail's body as the ships pull away from like the scene. She's like looking over the rail, and she sees where his blood is, but she doesn't see Sail. And traumatically enough, she hears a bunch of pirates start to laugh, and she turns to the front of the ship where they're tying his body to the stern, like on a post at the very front of the ship. And his dead eyes are like open and unseeing, and strapping him like crossways on this post saying like, yay, our ship finally has a sail. And they all joke about this while Oren literally thinks about how degrading it is for him to be some sort of creepy figurehead on the front of their ship, and how he's being used even in death, and she just throws up. So chapter 29 starts, and as the ship is picking up speed in the sleeting snow, the saddles are all left alone for a few hours, but even in the freezing wind, Oren stays standing, and she's like staring right at Sail's body, and like that anger that she felt when she pushed Mist is like starting to rise back up in her and like bubble back into her chest. And she at this point is like looking at Fane's knife for some reason in his scabbard as she starts to like walk across the ship. And there's this line, direct quote, it says, "It's easy, so easy to make it across the ship, to pass by without anyone bothering to even look my way. It's the arrogance of men to think so little of women, and it'll be their downfall too." Once she reaches Sail, her 24 back tentacles literally like reach for him. Her ribbons kind of start to grow wet with the sleet. This is kind of what I mean when I say that I think they actually are like a fabric, but I don't know. They start to try to like unwind the ropes that are holding Sail up, and when they can't, they actually like sharpen their edges into these like little sharp knives, and she uses them to cut through the ropes. Finally, a pirate notices what she's doing, and he tries to come and stop her, and like one of her ribbons like slashes out and cuts straight through his furs to his actual skin, like butter. I guess they're really sharp for fabric. Fane finally like notices, and he tries to stop her, and she is using like 22 tentacles, leaving 2 of them out to like fight against like other pirates, and she finally like gets Sail's body down right as Fane tries to stop her, and like Sail's body collapses into her and Fane, and they both like fall down. He gets back up as she's like still trying to like wrap her tentacles around Sail, I guess, and the other pirates are coming towards them. And it's at this point that Fane tells all the other pirates, he's like, no, I'm gonna deal with her, everyone stay back. And then he like leaves her alone long enough for her to use her strength to try and drag Sail's cold and heavy body across the ship until she finally like gets to a rail, and she's not strong enough to lift him over this rail, even with like her tentacles. And so she turns to like all her fellow saddles, and they all ignore her. Like they're like, no, we're not gonna be a part of this. Like it's so mean. Like she's literally just trying to keep his body from being degraded. None of the saddles care. They're like, no, we're not gonna help you. You got yourself in this mess. You're gonna have to figure it out. Those like 2 ribbons that she had left left out to like defend herself against Fane, and he hadn't tried anything in the meantime because of those. He also apparently thought that the whole reason that she was doing this is to escape on Sail's back. Like, he thinks that she's trying to like jump overboard on the ship with Sail and use Sail's body as a sled on the snow, and he's like, that's never gonna work, honey. You're silly. You're just a dumb, silly girl. And she's not doing that for that reason at all. It was just such a reach. She finally like takes those last 2 ribbons that she'd been using to like defend herself, and she wraps them around Sail, and it gives her the final push that she needed to throw him overboard. Fane finally like also attacks her at this point because there's nothing defending her, and he grabs all of her ribbons on her back in like a really crushing grip, which we're led to believe really does hurt. Like it's like a limb, you know? He tells her, he's like, you failed to even jump. You failed, dumb girl. And she's like thinking to herself, I quote, his place of rest might be a mound of snow in the middle of the barrens, but it's better than the alternative. I couldn't let him stay strung up for a second longer. And it's at this point that Fane, like holding the ribbons on her back, leads her back to his captain's quarters, saying that he'll just disrespect her body instead of Sail's. Ew. Chapter 30. She's like kind of trying to get her ribbons out of Captain Fane's grasp, but like it's not really working. They're really weak. Like I said, she doesn't really exercise and she never uses her ribbons. So like that ordeal of taking Sail's body across the ship, that completely drained her of her energy. And she does make a promise to herself. She's like, when I get out of this, I'm like literally never gonna let myself get in bad shape again. Captain Fane kind of like drags her up the 5 steps to his door, and he like pushes her up against his door because it's locked, and he's like looking for his key. At this point, like he's literally putting his key in the lock, and like she does not know. Well, she knows what's gonna happen to her, but all hope is lost. And then suddenly, like Quarter, Captain Fane's second in command, he comes like running up the stairs, and he's like, hey, we got a hawk back from like the ones that we sent out with that offer for like all the saddles. And Captain Fane's like, that was really fast. He grabs like the whatever the response is from Quarter's hand, and he reads it, and he's like, what the and Quarter's like, should we send a message back? And Fane's like, no, I mean, they're gonna be here before we can even get a message out, which is, again, really weird, really fast. No one should really know where they are, and it shouldn't have been this quick. And apparently it's not one of the people that like he sent a message to in the first place, is the idea that we're getting. So Quarter does ask, so who's gonna be here? And instead of answering, Fane, he's like, can I have your sash? And Quarter, of course, is like, okay. He's gonna use it, I guess, to tie up Oren's ribbons, which I don't even know why he actually asked for the sash, because what he ends up doing instead is like wrapping all her ribbons around her torso. I'm not laughing, but like he just like wraps them around her and like ties them in like really weird, bad, intricate knots like in the back of her body, like pulling them as tightly as they go. Like they're tugging on her skin, and like it hurts. And then after he finishes like knotting them in really big knots, he wraps the sash around her waist to like act as another layer, I guess, and he knots that in the back too. And he just tells Quarter to get all the other saddles up and working in the kitchen, because Cook, the guy's name is Cook, gonna have to have dinner ready in an hour for them and all the guests that they're about to have. Quarter takes Oren back over to where all the other saddles are, and he threatens the other saddles, and he does so very eloquently. He says that he will strip, whip, and throw them overboard if they so much as like utter a complaint or just like do not cooperate. And he threatens Oren not to mess with her ribbons by saying that if she messes with the ribbons like knotted on her back, he'll just cut them off of her. These are limbs, basically. Like, he's like, I'll cut them off. So she's led with all the other saddles to the kitchen, where they meet this awful, terrible man named Cook, and he gives them absolutely zero instructions on how to cook and threatens to injure them if they so much as mess up. But like, none of these girls have ever even like worked in a kitchen or been in a kitchen, so you can imagine how well this meal is about to go. So chapter 31, after an hour of like pans literally being thrown at them for not moving quick enough, they've made all the food and are told to start taking the servingware up to the dining room. And they get to this dining room, and it's like this small room that's packed absolutely to the brim with like tables and benches, and like with barely any room to walk between the benches. They just like have to put down the platewares and everything like that. And we get more dramatics from Mist. You remember Mist. She's like the black-haired saddle that like hates Oren for some reason. And Mist just happened to be next to Oren when they're putting down all these plates. Then they're all going back to the deck of the ship to like wait where the guests are going to be coming, I guess. And this is when Oren notices that like something is up. Her observational skills are excellent. But she like pushes to the rail. Like everyone's like crowded. There's all the pirates are there. All the saddles are there. There's like tons of people. So she like pushes her way over to the railing, like between all these little bodies. Like she can now see into the crowd, I guess, like into the center of the deck. And she sees that all the pirates and Fane are standing in the middle and they're facing this like lowered gangplank. And while she's like watching them and she's like kind of on her own, she decides to try to like undo her ribbon. I don't know. She's trying to hide it under the sash too, but like they're really knotted up. So it's not really working very well, but she starts to try, which is good. I mean, they're also damp, which apparently also hinders how easily they move. I think they really are like silk fabric. I don't understand, but it's fine. Like desperately starts tugging at like the most tender knot on her back with her hands. Like she's like hiding her little movements behind her and tries not to move at all. And then she starts to hear these like military style stomping up the gangplank. Like all of these like synchronized steps basically with like clanging armor and chainmail. And then suddenly there's about like a dozen soldiers coming up 2 by 2 in perfect synchronization. And then they like flare out into this pyramid shape in front of Captain Fane. And they're all wearing like this dark black armor with menacing helmets. And they're like extra scary because, and I quote, there, carved at the center of their midnight chest plates, between the leather straps is their kingdom's sigil, that twisted, misshapen tree with thorned roots, stripped of all leaves, 4 crooked branches, reaching out like the devil's claws. These are Fourth Kingdom soldiers, King Rot's soldiers. So yeah, Fourth Kingdom has made an entrance. As she's like watching this, she like freaks out and she stops trying to untangle her knots for a minute so that we can get a rundown that King Ravenger, King Rot's army, is the most feared. Again, in all 6 kingdoms, these like soldiers wait patiently as a 13th man starts to climb up the gangplank, moving past his soldiers, tall and menacing in the same black armor and dark leathers, but with the fun addition of spikes lining his spine and arms. So like he's got like spikes sticking out of his arms and like down his back. And as everyone whispers, you start to hear about this creature that King Rot made from the desecrated wastes of his own rotted kingdom. So obviously this is that creature. And King Rot, turned this regular person's body into an unnatural, cursed thing so that he could lead his armies. But our girl Oren, yeah, she knows better, because this male, so tall that Fane has to crane his neck up to look at him, he's not a human. He's Fae. And apparently not a single person except for Oren has ever guessed that this man is not human and is in fact pure-blooded Fae. So, chapter 32. Let's finally do a backstory on what the Fae are. That's what this entire chapter is. So, once upon a time, there was a 7th kingdom on the edge of their world. It's so far that even the sun and the moon only like skim their skies. A lovely moment for flat earthers, because here in this world, the 7th kingdom is where their world ended, on a cliff. And 7th just lived in this like perpetual gray state because again, the sun and the moon barely touch their skies. And this is where you find the bridge of Lemuria, the bridge that led to nowhere. It like sticks out of that spit of land. It's just a strip of gray dirt jutting out from the end of the earth, stretching far past what the eye could see, with nothing below or around it except that dark black void. And if you fall off, not even the gods and goddesses will find you to let you die. Like you just are falling forever, I guess. But 7th Kingdom was once upon full of scholars willing to send their own soldiers and their own people to find out what was at the other end, and no one ever returned. So this was eventually like hawked up to being a suicide mission, and instead of sending out like soldiers and their own people, they started sending out thieves and debtors instead, like criminals. That's kind of worse than death sentence if you actually think about it. Whatever. I guess don't be a criminal in 7th Kingdom. Again, no one would ever return until one day when a woman returns. A woman that once upon a time had been an orphaned girl who had gone looking for her father, who had never returned. When she was just 10 years old, she pushed and slipped past the guards and sprinted across this bridge that led to nowhere. And let me just read you this quote. She walked through time and space, battling madness and starvation and thirst. Where all the others finally caved and tossed themselves off the bridge, giving in, she pressed on. Where every other Orion man had failed, she succeeded. Sarah Turley, her name, had done it, and she actually wasn't returning alone, because what did she find at the end of the bridge? Anwin, the land of the Fae. And who did she return with? the prince of Lydia, which is apparently like a city in Anwen, the land of the Fae. Because when she fell through their sky, when she made it across the bridge, like Fae saw her and took her in and cared for her, and she got to know this beautiful, magical land with magical people and absolutely loved it. But for some reason, what she wanted as a wedding present from her prince, who she fell in love with, was to go home, to like see home. She missed Aurea. And he really went all out. He like walked her back across the bridge, and then he used like his incredible Fae magic to tie their realm with Aurea's realm so that anyone, Fae or human, could cross it without like the whole ordeal that she had to go through, and so that she could visit Aurea whenever, because even though like she never found her dad, she just still was really attached to her homeland, I guess. Aurea and the land of the Fae lived in harmony for hundreds of years, and they were sister realms tied by love. They mingled. This is actually how Aurea came to have magic in its people. It's from the Fae, and it's a magic that's actually been dwindling for the past 300 years, since no more Fae or humans have crossed the bridge in that time, because the Fae actually betray Aurea and severed that magical tie because of a Fae king that came like way after Sarah and her Fae prince, and he had thought of humans as like lesser beings, and he didn't like that the Fae were actually mingling with these lesser beings. He's like, we shouldn't be giving them our magic, we shouldn't be like degrading ourselves by sleeping with them, so I'm just gonna cut it off. Like he uses his incredible Fae king magic to just sever the tie, and when that tie was severed, it was like felt throughout both realms, and specifically throughout Seventh Kingdom. It literally swallowed Seventh Kingdom up. Like it just dropped into the void, and the land and its people were never seen again. And so Aurea has the Fae to thank for their magic, and they also hate the Fae for what they did. And there are no more Fae in their world, or so people believe. Dun, 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 dun. So anyways, chapter 33. Back to the commander, who Oren thought people had been exaggerating about. Like, she's looking at this man, the one that, remember, she thinks is Fae, and she had thought that everyone had kind of exaggerated about the commander of the Fourth Armies, because people called him Rip, and they had said that the reason that he's called Rip is for his predisposition to literally rip soldiers' heads from their bodies. That's a direct quote. And he's like a feared legend, as infamous as King Rot himself. And both of them are just really, really scary. They're scary things. And there had apparently been some rumors of him being kind of Fae, like definitely more Fae than other people, but she hadn't really believed any of them until he stood in front of her. And he's not like some kind of like watered down Fae. He's not like having Fae in his lineage. He is like a pure-blooded Fae male. And she's like, how has no one ever noticed? You know what I mean? I mean, like, he literally has spikes, which she assumes that other people had like dismissed as part of his armor, but she knows better, and she knows that like those spikes come from his body, like the ones on his arm and the ones on his spine. But apparently there's also rumors about how scary his face is under his helmet, but we won't be finding that out because Rip definitely still has his helmet on. And it's at this point that Fane states like, hey, I didn't expect you to be so close to us. Like, what's up? And weren't there issues at your border? Like, shouldn't you be at Fourth Kingdom? But like, you'll remember that already has kind of been dealt with. And Rip says it was just a nuisance that Rot wouldn't take lightly, which is why I guess they annihilated the army and didn't leave any survivors and have been sending rotting bodies to 5th and 6th. Him and Fane continue chit-chatting, and we learn that the Red Raids aren't usually this far up north, except for the fact that they'd actually gotten a tip from some anonymous source that it was going to be worth their while. Gotta wonder who would give them a tip that this caravan was traveling, you know? And it's at this point that we learn that those dozen messenger hawks that Fane had sent out to potential buyers for Midas's traveling party had actually all been intercepted by Rip. And none of the messages got out. And Rip is like, no, but don't worry about it, because he's willing to buy them all as some sort of revenge against Midas. King Ravager wants to do it to kind of like spit in Midas's face, you know? He's like, so don't worry. It doesn't matter that no one else knows that you have these people. I know, and I'll buy them. This actually horrifies Oren more than having to stay with the Red Raids or like being sold to random buyers, because Fourth's army is known, again, for being very heartless and brutal and ruthless. So she assumes that they're probably going to be like worse people, and they're going to be treated worse by Fourths than these terrible, awful pirates could have ever treated them, which I think is a bit of an exaggeration, because the things that these pirates have said, I have not told you all the things that they have said. They're nasty. They're disgusting. We don't like them. They would have done nasty, bad things. Well, Oren notices that Fane never mentions her, but he does mention all of the other saddles, and Rip responds that he'll take them all, and the horses too, and like the remaining still alive guards, and that he's sure they'll come to an agreement. And Fane is really icky at this point and says that he and his men thought that they'd have a couple of weeks to enjoy them, and Rip just says, like, I'm sure we'll come to an agreement, dude. Like, you'll have to get yours somewhere else. It's not gonna be with these girlies. So kind of like a knight in shining armor, but like they still don't know what they're gonna be getting into with Fourth's army. Fane at this point is like, well, it's best to like come to an agreement while we eat, right? Like, let's just eat. And he starts to lead him over to the dining room. And chapter 34 begins. All of the saddles are actually expected to wait on these men. Rip's soldiers finally take their helmets off when they sit down in this dining table to eat, but they're still really quiet and watchful. Unlike the pirates, because the pirates keep trying to like rile up the saddles. They're like smacking their asses and like yelling crude things at them and just like making their lives generally difficult, while like the fourth soldiers are like menacing and scary, but like them on their own bench, they're not bugging the saddles. And as Oren is about to step in to like continue helping with all her fellow saddles with like 2 pitchers of wine, one of the pirates actually stops her and he's like, no, not you. And this is when she realizes that Captain Fane doesn't want Rip to see that Oren is in his possession, so that she's excluded from whatever deal they might make, because her name again was never mentioned in the outgoing letters nor in like his conversation with Rip. She kind of feels a little bit of dread at that, but she is herded back over to the kitchen. Cook throws something at her and he tells her to start like cleaning up, and so she's been cleaning up the kitchen. And then much later, Polly comes in and she says that she needs help carrying more ale because they've all requested more ale, and Oren is like, yeah, I'll help you, but I can't go all the way in, but I'll help you carry it out there. So she accompanies Polly back out, but she waits at the front of the door. Risa comes over to take the extra jugs of ale from Oren. And at this point, of course, Mist, our favorite sassy saddle, sees Oren, and she has to make a snide remark about how the favored doesn't even have to serve like the rest of them do, which is kind of like a shitty thing because Oren's been cleaning this whole time. She's about to get left out of whatever like possible deal there is. I mean, granted, better the devil you know than the one you don't, but like so far, the pirates just seem like the worst kind of devil. And if she's going to be left alone with them, that's like a horrifying thought. Oren is like thrown back to the kitchen after that, and she's told to clean every dirty dish that is brought to her by like all the other saddles. Her guard pirate is like watching over her, but after she finishes cleaning all the dishes, he's like, I want to see what's happening. You have to stay quiet. Stay behind me. Come here. As she's like following him out, she kind of has like this pity party moment for herself, and she just like kind of wishes that Midas would find her, but she also knows that he never would, or if he ever does, it's going to be way too late. But anyways, chapter 35 starts, and she watches the commander's army and Fane now discussing things in the center of the deck, and she's still kind of like standing behind her guard pirate as she tries to like loosen more of her ribbons from the knots behind her back. And she watches Commander Rip and Captain Fane come to an agreement, some sort of agreement. And Rip has one of his men bring this like big old trunk in front of Fane, and he has it opened and it's like overflowing with gold coins. It's like an unimaginable amount of wealth. Before he actually like fully gives the trunk over to Fane, he's like, I'll take my purchases now. Fane is like, okay, yeah, sure, you can have all the saddles, come here. He's like, I'm going to tell you about the soldiers and the horses that are being kept on another ship. And as he's walking away, Rip says, I meant all of his people, his being Midas, including her. And he points directly to where she has been in the back of the crowd, like impossible to see, but he sees her and he points at her. Fane is like, no, I'm going to be keeping her. She was never for sale. Liar. But Rip says, you really thought I'd give you a trunk full of gold for some saddles, half-dead men, and snow horses? No, I'll take the favored as well. Fane expectedly still tries to refuse and asks, like, what happens if I do refuse? And Rip was just like, you're not gonna like the results. Don't refuse. And Fane finally just asks, like, how he knew that he had the king's favored, because her name was never mentioned again. And cryptically, Rip just says, I have my own tips. Finally, Fane is like, okay, fine, but he tells Corder to take Rip to go check on the horses and the men first and to just come back for the saddles right after that. And he tells like some more of his men to just like put the trunk in his captain's quarters. The saddles are ordered to wait for Rip in the dining room, but literally as Oren and all the other saddles are being like taken to the dining room, she and Risa are stopped with like someone grabbing them by the arms. And it's Captain Fane, and he's like, literally, shut up and come with me. All the saddles that do hear it are like, oh, but like they don't want to interfere. They don't want to get in trouble. So Risa and Oren are led back to his captain quarters, and he's talking some big game about how clever Rip must think he is. Captain Fane is like, I went through a lot of trouble to get you guys. I'm gonna get some of mine. And he's gonna have some fun first. So Risa is obviously troubled. Oren is obviously troubled. Risa's also like the best at what they do. So she doesn't say a word as Oren, once again, as she's being led into the captain's quarter, just like looks up at the night sky and she's like begging for dawn. This has been the longest night of her life, seriously. But instead of seeing dawn, she gets shoved into the captain's rooms instead, where we can presume some very nasty things are about to happen. So chapter 36, we see the room. It's a small room and it's like stuffed full of like a desk on one side, like the captain's desk, and like he has a bed pushed up against the other corner, and like right like where the bed is pushed up against, there's like this wall of windows, so like floor to ceiling windows. And obviously you see the trunk of gold sitting next to like the desk. I mean, it doesn't really matter what this room looks like, but that's what Oren is fixated on because Fane stares at them. And at this point, Oren starts to kind of like lose her cool. She's freaking out. Like this dude's about to do some bad things to them. And Risa calmly is like trying to motivate her. She's like, this is just a performance. We can get through this. Just pretend it isn't real. And that really like sits with Oren. She's like, okay, yeah. If I just like am not in my body, if I pretend this isn't real, then it's not happening to me. It's happening to someone else. Risa kind of like takes control of the situation. She is like their leader for the most part. And she has like sultry eyes and a sultry voice. And she's like complimenting the captain's room. But he just gives her like I don't have time to play along, strip and get into the bed. Yeah. Risa really does try to make the best of it and like take charge. So it's not really too startling to her as she undresses for him and waits for him on the bed. And I'm not going to talk too much about the scene coming up because it is disturbing. Trigger warnings for like sexual assault basically, but I'll give you some bare details. You'll have to read the book if you actually want like the full details, but she continues to try and keep like this performance up, but he more so gets off on the idea that she isn't enjoying herself, so he like proceeds to make it the most unenjoyable and rough time he can. Like he tells her to shut up, and anytime like she makes any noise, he kind of punishes her until Oren can't take it anymore and she tries to step in and tell him to stop. At this point, Fane turns his attention to Oren and he like backhands her across the face and then kicks her when she falls to the ground, like bruising or like breaking some of her ribs. And then he turns back around to Risa to continue. It's at this point where like he like kind of wrapped a belt around Risa's neck so that she couldn't really breathe very well, and he's just... And Oren, like on the ground, looks out the windows and starts to see that dawn is finally coming up. Like she's finally starting to see the sky light up. And it's at this point that she's like, you have to get up, you have to get up, you have to help Risa. So she picks herself up, and just as the sun like fully crests and like this watery light like seeps into the sky, pushes towards Fane again. And Fane sees Risa seeing Oren basically, and he starts like stalking over to her, and he's like, okay, you're next, you want your turn so bad. And her resolve like strengthens as she steps into the weak daylight, and her skin is tingling, and she moves closer to Fane, and she slaps her bare hand against his throat and like grabs onto it. A few moments pass as like Fane looks at her like super confused, you know, but something starts to like seep beneath his skin into his organs, and it spreads from the area she touches him in, his face being the last thing to go, confused eyes wide and staring at her as they gloss over as he's solidified in gold. This is a good scene. I mean, everything that led up to it, nasty. This scene, good. Chapter 37. Honestly, she's got no regrets. Like, not a single regret about, like, turning this man into gold. But her heart is pounding from what she just kind of, like, revealed to Risa. We don't necessarily understand what just happened. We just know that somehow Oren just turned a man into gold. Risa's face is obviously tear-stained, and she asks, like, what Oren just did. She's like, what did you just do? What was that? And Oren's just like, are you okay? Like, she ignores the question completely, but just like kind of asks her to see if she's still doing okay. Like, a headache starts to like bloom in Oren's head, and her strength is like leaving her. Like, that apparently took everything out of her. That is not something that she is used to doing. So Risa stands up and they both examine this like pathetic excuse for a pirate whose member is standing at attention. She does tell Risa, she's like, you can probably hack that off with a hammer if you want. And Risa asks, like, once again, she's like, how did you do this? Also, is he really dead? And Oren is like, yeah, no, he's super very dead. Oren is like trying to move on with it. She's like, there's really no time to explain how this works, like, between me and Midas. So just as like they're like, having this kind of like back and forth, the floor under Captain Fane starts to kind of like give under the weight of this solid gold man. Like, he's very heavy now. He is solid gold. So before they can really like figure out what to do, she swears Risa to secrecy. She's like, please, no one can know. Like, it's gotta be a secret between us two. And Risa gives in because she realizes that Oren only did it to get him to stop hurting her. Kind of like with the book thing, but not as bad. Risa redresses really quick and Oren covers like her own ripped dress. I guess Fane ripped it at one point. And she just like sees a brown overcoat and she like tosses it on. And they have to deal with this like now solid gold Captain Fane. So Risa quickly realizes like what Oren's thinking when she glances at the floor to ceiling windows. Like, Oren's staring at those windows. Fane is really close to them. Risa's like, there's no way we can move him. Like, his weight is gonna be way too much for either of us. And they're like, we gotta try. Like, we have to at least try. So they do like this like fancy stuff with like the sheets, like the bed sheets, like they wrap it around him, trying to like pull him to like tip him over so that he topples into the window. And they quickly realize that's really not going to work. Oh, I should say that Oren opened the windows for all this, that they're not just gonna be like shattered or anything like that, but she opened the windows. But after some like crafty DIY skills, she like hooks like the sheets through a hook, and they put like the captain's chair behind him so that like he just has to roll into the captain's chair or something like that. But like, it's like a pulley system to try and get him to topple over. And Risa is pulling and Oren is pulling, and like her ribbons are wrapped around Captain Fane and they're trying to pull and push him over. Kind of funny because at this point Oren is like thinking to herself, she's like, I'm either gonna black out or this is gonna work. There's no in between. And I'm like, as she's like pulling with her ribbons, like using all of her absolute might, like literally seeing spots, her ribbons start to glow, which according to her, they've never done that before. But if you'll remember that thing in the carriage, maybe that was her ribbons, but they start to glow with like this like weak, like glowy daylight. And then she gets this extra surge of strength through her ribbons and Captain Fane just starts to tip. And his shins hit like the floor, but like gravity's already got its hold on him. So then he just like twists and turns and falls into the snow. And he falls like, or face up, so then his thing is the only thing like above the snow basically, and more snow is falling on him to like cover up his body. It worked. And she and Risa grab the trunk of gold and they throw it over the edge, which like Risa's like, can you explain why we just did that? And Oren's like, we needed a motive for why he's not here anymore. They're making it seem like he ran off with the money. So now it's chapter 38. We're almost at the end, guys. So suddenly there's like a pirate knocking on the door with like a captain, they're coming back, because like he's gonna give him a warning. Because obviously what the captain is doing to Risa, or what he was doing to Risa and Oren, is not what he's supposed to be doing. Like, that was not part of the deal. He has a pirate warn him when the people are coming back. And Oren and Risa are left scrambling. Risa's like literally jumping to the bed, and she like secures her wrist to the headboard with that captain's belt that had been around her neck. And Oren's like, just like muss up your dress, make it look like real. So she like pulled up her dress and like opened it up a little bit. And Oren like falls to the floor, and with like the few ribbons that she has gotten out of the knot, I guess, she wraps her wrist against like the foot of the bed, and she also pulls up her whole dress like basically to the top so that like maybe enough skin would distract the pirates from how weird the situation looks. So the guy like knocks again with like a, they're coming up now, and Oren tells Risa, like, she's like, can you cry on command? And Risa's like, of course I can cry on command, I'm a professional. She is an actrice. Pirate is knocking on the door, and at this point we realize that it's Quarter, his second in command, and he's asking like, is everything okay? Just as Risa points to Captain Fane's hat and coat that are still on the desk. And there's no time to do anything about that. Like, he wouldn't leave without those things, but she, like, Oren is just hoping that the pirates don't notice that that's right there. Because right at that time, like, the door literally splinters and the pirates just like barge in. Quarter like pounds his way over to Risa, asking where the captain is, and she just starts wailing, like crying, screaming, very authentically, I might add. After he kicks Oren in the shin, she like spills the tea, and she's like, after we were taken, we were tied up and told to be quiet as the captain ran off with the coin. And Quarter, he actually believes this, and he starts yelling about how it was all a conspiracy, to which another pirate reminds him like that the commander is still waiting for like his saddles and the favored. Even though Quarter agrees that they will have a mutiny if they find out that the captain ran off with the coin and they still gave the saddles to the commander, he does concede that they'll also be dead if they deny the commander. So just to get the saddles out to him, like there's no winning. And just as they're being led out, one of the other pirates inside of the room asks, like, isn't that the captain's coat and hat? Which stops the pirates right in the tracks from leading Risa and Oren outside of the room. And Quarter literally like turns on Oren and backs her up into a corner as she says like, well, I don't know, he must have been in a hurry. But he continues like stalking toward her. He doesn't believe her. And she's like exhausted and drained, and she like can tell that he knows that she's lying, but he doesn't know about what exactly, and she doesn't know how to save the lie either. And then he says like one of the most vile things to date in the book about filling her with his so much that it will corrode her gilded coochie. Anyways, but just as he's about to like make her talk like with force, we hear, and I quote, "What do you think you're doing?" Chapter 39. And Oren snaps open her eyes because they've been closed for all this. Just as Quarter turns around to see the commander, Commander Rip, with two other soldiers, menacing and seething, telling him to step away from the favored. Quarter actually does try to say, he's like, I'm going to finish this discussion with her because she's a liar. And like the commander literally only laughs to this like menacing, sickly aura like pulsing around him with a promise of violence. And Quarter finally is like, fine, you can have her because you can't trust any words out of a whore's mouth anyways. Okay. Commander Rip and his men lead Risa and Oren out past like the sneering faces of the pirates towards the gangplank. And it's at this point where like while she's walking down the gangplank, I guess, Oren's exhaustion just like causes her to literally topple over the edge. And she like tries to stop her fall with like some of her loose ribbons in her arms. Luckily, she's like close to the bottom. So even though it hurts when she falls over the edge of this gangplank, she doesn't break anything. And I'm pretty sure the words bright side were used at this point. And she's just laying on the ground as the pirate ships pull away from this whole scene. And she like turns to look at this frozen landscape that's being exposed by the pirate ship. And she's shocked to see hundreds, if not thousands, of Fourth Army soldiers camped around the ships. And suddenly it's like super clear to her why the pirates didn't fight Commander Rip, because it was literally a death sentence. Like the entire army was there. Which, did they see her throw King Folk overboard? Like how are they not wrapped around the back of the ship? You know what I mean? I don't know. Whatever. This is like the full army coming to wage war against her king. And she realizes, like, now they have her. And as she's still laying there in the snow, she sees, like, black boots come into her line of vision. And she, like, looks up to see Commander Rip as the army behind him begins to, like, move out, I guess. And she finally sees his face without his helmet on. And she is proud to tell us that all those rumors about his face were lies. He doesn't have horns. He doesn't have literally glowing, murderous eyes. And he doesn't have any ugly scars. In fact, he's kind of handsome. Let me explain. He has black eyes, black brows, above which are a line of tiny blunted spikes that like match up the spikes on his arms and stuff, but these are like not spiky, they're just blunt. They're like studs. He has elongated canines, which like, how did people not realize he was a fae? Whatever. Iridescent gray scales above his cheekbones. He has black hair, a square jaw, and pointed ears. Once again, how do people not realize he's fae? And he's 6.5 feet tall. He's tall, dark, handsome, terrifying, and like super duper fae. So you see, Oria is still like terrified of the fae, obviously, but they also hate them, which is why they apparently have rulers with magic, so that if the fae ever come to finish what they started, their rulers can possibly protect them. And she wonders if that's why people refuse to see what's right in front of them with Rip. And she actually also wonders if King Ravager even realizes what he has leading his armies and what he has leashed to him. But she finally stands up under his like watchful eyes, and her ribbons are like just laying on the ground behind her. They're exhausted. They've had a day. They have their first exchange. I'm quoting now. So it's going to be him So this is King Midas's pet. I didn't expect to find a goldfinch. I don't know what that means. I'm not gonna lie. Like, is a goldfinch something that's disguised? He knew she was gold, you know? I don't understand that. So anyways, she looks at him and she's like, I know what you are. Like, threatening him, basically. And he just smirks and he leans in close and he whispers in her ear and he's like, funny, I was about to say the same thing about you. Yeah, no, this is terrible, but so good at the same time. Chapter 40. This is the last, like, official chapter in the book, and this one's actually from the perspective of King Midas. He's sitting in Fifth Kingdom. He's, like, in this, like, fancy room, and he's looking out on the snowy fields, and he's thinking about how he's been to, like, every kingdom in Oria, and he gives us a cute little rundown of every kingdom in Oria, so I'll give it to you. Apparently, first is a jungle, and their rulers are, like, masters of arts. The second kingdom is a desert with, like, puritanical religious monarchs. Third are beautiful coasts with, like, private islands that you literally need invites to, but, like, the only downside about third is that they have to share a border with the rotting lands of Fourth Kingdom. Fifth Kingdom, which is the one he's currently in, he's actually very fond of lately because it has, like, these pristine white lawns and ice sculptures, which he can't wait to gild gold because, like, he just hasn't done it yet. Fifth has, like, a way more mild winter in comparison to Fifth's, like, constant blizzards. In Sixth, he can't have ice sculptures, so he's kind of excited that in Fifth he can. But right now he's just kind of visiting as, like, a helping monarch. But we get the idea that even though he's in the guest suites, he doesn't think he's gonna be a guest for much longer and that he will eventually maybe take power. And suddenly, while he's thinking about this, there's a messenger that comes in with, like, a slip of paper and they're like, this is for you. And he reads it, and he reads it 3 times actually, and he's, like, angry. You can tell, like, the anger is rolling off of him in waves. His body has gone rigid. He's furious. And you hear his advisor, Odo, ask, like, sire, what's going on? Midas just answers, they have her. And then Odo's like, who? And Midas just starts stomping around in a rage, and, like, no one will dare interrupt this because they obviously are scared of him solidifying their heads in gold where they stand. Let me read you how this book ends. I don't feel it when I stop and slam my fist into the wall. I don't care when my knuckles split and blood stains the white carpet in furious blots of red. I don't feel it and I don't care because the thing that matters the most to me in this world has been taken from me. My favored, my gilded, my precious, she's been stolen from me and is being held in enemy clutches. And then we'll skip a little bit. She's mine, and I'll destroy everyone in my path to get her back. Yeah. All right. And then I'm not going to summarize this. I'm just going to read it to you. But the actual book ends in, like, a poem. So it's The Golden Gold Vine, part 1. There was a miser who prized her, this golden gold vine, this sapling so gilded her leaflings did shine. The moment he saw her, he let out a whisper of mine. He'd found her in rubble along a plain road. Unburied, he took her, in pocket he stowed. Back to his house where he stared at her gleam, hands curled to covet, once stitched to seam. What a chance this was, the chance for much more, so he planted her there right outside his front door. Kept under secrets and hidden she lay, this old miser did find her, did steal her away. Brought to the yard, he planted her there, fenced her all in to shelter her glare. Soon she grew tiny buds, glinting with gold, he plucked them by one, went to town to be sold. He paid off his debts, bought whatever he sought, but it wasn't enough whatever he got. For greed had been planted beside her thin roots, want had leafed out along with her shoots. Yet although he watered, soon she did wilt, her golden did dull, and worry he spilt. For his most prized possession looked right to be cold, she wasted away while he fretted and mulled. It wasn't till so angry he pulled out his hair, brown clumps all fallen on the vine bare, that her color suddenly glistened, her vine did then surge. She grew ever much from his body he'd purged. Ecstatic he knew what he must do, so this miser clipped, and gold flowers then bloomed. His hair he snipped, gladly shedding his plume. For she would not grow without sacrifice, only pieces of him would ever suffice. For her to keep growing, that was her price. This golden gold vine was the miser's own vice. We did it. That's the book. I have no idea how long this video is. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you enjoyed this kind of series and leave recommendations down below for other books you would want me to do this for. It takes a little bit of time, so I don't expect it right away, but I am very glad that the first video is done, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I actually had a pretty good time. My voice is almost gone, but I had a pretty good time. Do you want to see how long my script was? Like I said, I didn't want to forget anything. This is the first time I've ever had a scripted video, and hopefully it still was fun. This how thick. It's 39 pages. Wait, not 39. That's dramatic. I think it's 29. Yeah, it's 29 pages. It took me a week to write that script. Next time that I do this, I'm gonna write my notes as I read it. I did not do that with this book. I read through it like a month ago, and I had this idea all along, and I had to go back and basically do a reread. But who cares? Like I said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any tips on how you would want me to proceed with this series. And yeah, that's gonna be it. I'm done talking. I'm so done talking for today. Thank you so much for watching. The sun is going down, and now I'm gonna go. Bye-bye. Guys, it started off rainy, it got sunny, the rain came down, pouring, then the sun came back out, and now, like, the world is dim again with clouds. I don't even know how many hours this took. I think, like, 5. Bye!
A beautiful creature.